All right, I'm going to call the Finance Committee meeting to order at 7:15. Sorry for the delay. Can we do roll call?
Chow? Here. Moody? Here. Helfer?
Here. All right, the first action item, the Finance Committee recommends that the minutes of May 6, 2019 Finance Committee meeting be approved as presented or amended.
Second. Moody? Yes. Yes.
Yes. The Finance Committee recommends that the CLIC insurance renewal premium payment for fiscal year 20 be approved as presented or amended. Anything you should know about this? Beyond what's in the packet?
CLIC is the commercial liability carrier that the district uses for its insurance that insures all property and as well as any liability that the district might encounter in its daily operation.
And that's, as in the memo, it's about a 9.8% increase from last year?
Yes. And it's driven in large part by the claim history of all the members of the co-op. And it's a portion based on our particular participation in that claim history.
Any other questions about it? We're recommending that the insurance renewal premium payment be approved as presented.
Second. Yes. Yes.
Yes. All right, the self-workers compensation renewal premium payment plan?
Similar situation, the district is a member of a co-op that insures against workman's comp claims by members and employees of the district. And so the rate that we're being asked to pay is dependent on the claim history we have relative to other members in the cooperative.
Pretty standard, right?
Yes,
Any
pretty
other
standard.
questions? All right, so the Finance Committee recommends that the FY20 self-workers compensation renewal premium payment be approved as presented.
Second. Yes. Yes.
Yes. All right, the prevailing wage resolution for fiscal year 20, also an annual event.
Yes, it is. It's a state law that requires that every governmental entity that uses public fund must have a resolution requiring those entities to pay whatever is the prevailing wage in the state and the county where the entity operates.
Can I have a recommendation that the FY20 prevailing wage resolution be approved as presented?
Second. Yes. Yes.
Yes. Working cash fund transfer for fiscal year 20.
What that is in keeping with the requirement that the funds that are in the working cash can be transferred to any other funds that can use the money.
All right, so a Finance Committee recommendation that the fiscal year 20 working cash fund transfer be approved as presented.
Second. Yes. Yes.
Yes. Action item 6, the intergovernmental agreement between ETHS and District 65 for the use of the ETHS day school. So everybody got a memo on this. I know there were some questions thrown around before. Any background?
Yes, let me provide some information for you. So over a year ago, the middle school social work PLC, so I meet in PLCs with all the social workers and discuss what concerns are, et cetera, during the course of the year. We discussed the growing amount of students with social emotional needs in the middle school grades. They discussed how students come into the middle school where previously they may not have had any issues that people were acutely aware of, but come into middle school and at that time they may become more emotionally dysregulated, some of them beginning to suffer from depression and anxiety. Many of these students have not been previously identified as requiring an IEP or a 504 plan, but that their needs become more apparent during this time period. Some of these students have internalizing behaviors and may become school avoidant, may struggle with others bullying them, could be transitioning in their gender identity, or may begin developing a self-injurious profile. Some are students who have been repeatedly hospitalized. Social workers specifically advocated for these students to receive a more restrictive setting, a place where it could be quieter, relationship-based, smaller classroom of students, where we are supporting their needs both emotionally and academically. I was approached during the school year by Lene Walls regarding the possibility of having one classroom at their new school that would take up to 8 students. I was pleased at the prospect as having students who have returned from hospitalizations but have not yet received an IEP would be a setting where students could be served and provided support. Many of the students will require an IEP. Some we're just starting the process with. This school would provide these students the opportunity to remain in the community and not be transported 1.5 to 3 hours per day for a private day school. Last year, a day school closed in our nearby that we use, and this year, another day school has closed. In April and May of this year, we have been unable to get students into schools for their needs to be addressed as schools are full. As a result, we have not been able to provide these children the supports emotionally and academically that they need as they have a hard time attending school. Some of them spend lengthy periods of time in the social workers' offices in middle school, and we are looking for a way to provide them the support that they need. This would allow students to stay in their community and to hopefully return some of these students to their general education setting if this serves the students' needs. No student who is currently in a private day setting has been considered for this program. However, to get any of these things established, there are many pieces to get this into play. In order to address this, we needed to solidify this with District 202, have our joint attorney, Brian Crowley, develop an intergovernmental agreement, have this reviewed by our joint business offices 3 to 4 times, which that happened, where we were rewriting parts of it, and determine the financial agreement. Until a week and a half ago, we did not have any clear idea about whether this intergovernmental agreement would come into play. It was May 24th, I noticed. So these pieces are just coming together, which has prompted this memo and request for approval. But as this is the end of the school year and staff are about to leave in a day and a half, we needed to begin to address this with some families. At this point in time, we've addressed it with 5 families. Parents have the option of this or not. This is not something that we are making any family or student do. I wish that the planning and decision-making had occurred earlier, but it did not. This was an error on my part alone, that this was delayed and was never an effort to be non-transparent. This was always an effort to find solutions and programming to best meet the needs of our student and to build our capacity to do so. Questions?
Thank you for the statement, Joyce. And I think, I'll speak for myself, I can definitely appreciate wanting to have more options for kids. One of my biggest concerns, and I shared this in a question, was we have on all the memos, right, there's the X that says what this is about. So today is a decision memo. And even if there wasn't an intergovernmental agreement in play yet, we could have had an information meeting. We often have working board meetings with topics where community members can join us at the table and ask questions and share concerns or promote ideas that they're behind. And given that it's June, I think the ship has sailed on that being able to happen in an authentic way. And I'm concerned that we don't have enough information as a board I don't have enough information as a board member to say whether I'm for this or not. The other thing is that we're being asked to fund essentially a new site. I realize it's not the entirety of a site, but we're putting deck members on another site when we're having struggle funding the sites we have. So those are my key concerns that I would like more time to discuss.
Well, I guess my only response to that would be, this is one special ed teacher. We have the classroom. I think Raphael and I have talked about the money and how much this would cost. We feel that this is very affordable, and we feel it's in the best interests of children in order for them to have a quieter, more self-contained place where we're really working with those children on relationships and some of their social emotional needs. And you're right, I did not bring this up earlier, and it should have come earlier. We do not plan to start this program, or our game plan to start this program was in the fall, not the summer.
I would agree. I don't feel comfortable making a decision. I don't feel like I have the information that I need, and I also am aware of conversations that have been happening in our community about the day school, but I don't feel like I've had time to process the details of our community's perspective, particularly our community of families with children who have IEPs. And I feel like understanding their perspective is really important in terms of informing this decision. So I just don't feel like I have enough time to make an informed decision. The other point that I wanted to make is not directly related to whether or not I feel like we can make a decision on this. It is related to, you mentioned children having mental health needs, and you listed some of those needs, and one of the needs you listed was gender transition. And I think that it's really important that we not characterize gender transition as a mental health need. Someone may have mental health needs and may also be engaged in the process of gender transition, but I think it's really important that we be respectful of our community that is non-binary and transgender and not characterize it as a mental health condition.
I think that's fair.
And I guess the other question I have is about process, which I hear you apologizing for the miss and bringing the conversation earlier, but how could we engage in conversation with families about an option that has not necessarily been secured or approved by the board? You said some families had been communicated with about having this option.
We place students in private day all the time. That isn't something that we have ever discussed with the board. So I guess, yes, this is a new site, but that's just, we place children all the time.
But it would be a new site with a District 65 employee.
That's right.
In addition to tuition, right?
Right. So that's an additional cost.
It's not like we're staffing it and then there's not tuition. Because one of the things I'm all for creative ideas that are pre-K through 12 in this community. In lieu of actual consolidation, ideas like this are wonderful and require strong collaboration between the organizations and the community to get it done right and get it off the ground. I'm certainly not opposed to that, which is why my main concern is that we are both staffing it and providing tuition. The other thing from what you shared, it sounds like some of these kids don't have IEPs.
Some of them don't. We're in the process, though, with them.
So I assume there's an event that's led to that recommendation. Is there no space capacity to provide a self-contained program within one of our current sites? Because they lose all general education peers by going to a day school. So that's obviously there's a reason for that recommendation, and I respect that. If there was a space in one of our sites for a self-contained program, would that still be the recommendation? And or is it not possible to have to open up another self-contained space within one of our middle schools?
Or at Rice, potentially, where I know we've been.
One of our currents, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, and maybe there's no, I don't want you to like find an answer. I'm curious to, I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm asking because I feel like there's a number of due diligence steps that I would want to know about before saying yes to entering into agreement that opens up this door.
Right, so I appreciate the questions, because the questions will have us generate whether or not, how we would operate in this option, and then we'd have to do things like space availability, what's in the best interest of the kids, what's in the best interest of the parents, given the situation that the young person is in, where we would typically go to a day school. Is it better to go to a day school that's out of district? Is it better to try to create an opportunity in district? And I think that's the space that we were in. And we were looking, so this has to be driven by substance and need and finances as well. And so it's a combination of all of the above. So I appreciate, I mean, the questions are worth, please give us some of these questions so we can pursue it.
I also didn't see clearly in the agreement, but if somebody in a neighboring district wanted to utilize the day school, and that child was of age to be in the school, in the classroom staffed by a D65 staff member, is that tuition going to the day school fully, to 202? Is that something that's being apportioned off?
I don't think that's something we've entertained yet.
But so those are things that I would definitely want to know before going further. Okay.
Yeah, so I think my feeling is similar. I respect, Joyce, that as experts you're trying to fill a need, and this is a little different because we have kind of, as members of this community, kind of observed some of the feedback in the community and quite frankly some lack of clarity on the target need for the students that are ETHS students that are planning or going to be attending the day school. So my concern really is, okay, first, unlike another outplacement where there's years of precedent in the need that particular school is filling, and what, we are looking at a program that I'm not real clear on what the target population or target service need is for the broader school, these 4 classrooms, because it's a relatively small space, I believe, right? There are 4 total classrooms. We're looking at taking a quarter of those classrooms. And while I agree in principle, it's great to have pre-K to 12 opportunities. If you're looking at students that may have behavioral concerns, I have a concern around 6th graders potentially being in the same space as seniors or juniors in high school that may have very different needs. And so I think that that's kind of an interest in more information about what's the focus of the need base for the broader day school. And then we have a focus of our need boost. How are those children going to interact? And those are all questions that you may have the answer to, but we don't. And there has been larger, broader discussions around that from just the ETHS perspective of the day school. And I think it's because we're dealing with younger kids who may also have pretty significant needs. How they're going to be part of that larger school is an interest area and concern that I would bring to the discussion. So as we talk about, like, we don't have enough answers yet, that's one of the things for me. I think in general, as you already stated, we went to a point like 6 or so years ago when the board was going to create a policy around programmatic changes end of year, when we were moving a behavioral classroom from one school to another. That was kind of the precursor for a much broader board discussion, and I think I was just coming into the discussion, so it must have been 6 years ago. And so this speaks to me of something similar, where we're talking about a population that's particularly vulnerable and families, and they're being asked to make a decision around an unknown, and it's an unknown for us, so versus other knowns, and it's very late in the year for fall. So I guess I would caution us just to, not that this is the wrong answer, But it feels like we have to slow down and understand what's going to what is going to happen in the school in general in the fall that's being stood up in the fall, and is it right for us to be bringing kids in at the point in which that whole programming is being stood up? I question that, even though, and maybe it's going to be totally isolated, but it feels to me, and I haven't seen the place, but just in having conversations with members of the community, that it's, it is a relatively small space. There's not a whole lot of kids total, and so will be a significant portion of that. And then I think parlaying that into a longer discussion, without getting into the details of the agreement, I have some concerns about who's providing what services. So, there's talk in the agreement about ETHS may provide, whole host of services, including social work and other things. So at the end of the day, what is the commitment from each party if we're entering to this agreement? Are they going to actually provide that, or are they not going to provide it? If they provide it, and again, this is hearsay, but what I've heard from the community is that there isn't a plan to have on-site social work. So if that's the case, and the ETHS kids are going to the high school, does that mean the 65? I think there's a whole host of questions around the provision of services and who's obligated to do that leads both to the service quality, but also to the end cost. If you're looking at a total package cost of this, if the ETHS may provide but doesn't have to, and we need to provide those services, then are we equipped to do that at another site? So clearly, though, I want to make sure that the more expansive pieces, we have children with need, and I get that, and it may be an emergent need. I feel like putting them into a situation, a program that to me doesn't feel like it's fully baked, to be brutally honest, or at least from the community standpoint, and I can only because I'm not privy to any other information in the general community coming into this, it doesn't feel like it's been extremely well defined as where is that entity going to play. And it seemed from talking to folks that, I think you've pretty clearly defined at least where we want to be able to deliver quality services, but how does that fit with the larger vision of the day school?
Well, just to add to that, this is 7th and 8th graders that we would be servicing there, and these are students who are very fragile. And sometimes we have to provide them a more protected environment for them to be successful. So I hear what you're saying. We do have in our intergovernmental agreement the provision of related services through ETHS. But certainly we would add social work services for students that we know and that we have worked with in our settings. So, but I hear what you're saying.
I think those are the kind of I feel like this is an appropriate discussion for a board meeting, and would advocate for us to not take action on as a finance committee, but to recommend that it be taken up at a subsequent board meeting as an agenda item for discussion. And I guess the team needs to say, well, what would be the cost of that, right, for kids too, because we need to understand that if we're delaying action, what does that mean for families? How many folks have already, based on these discussions, said that they would be interested in this? Another it's a more detailed point, but just to the information that may or may not be there. So I guess we get this at the same as other outplacements, but there's a concern, and maybe I would have the same concern if we're talking about other outplacements, but just from a continuity standpoint, this agreement is written such that, with 90 days notice, if ETHS decided, going into starting this, and I don't know if this is the case, but going in, we don't have enough demand to take full 4 classrooms, but after year 1, we have more interest, and they decide they want to take that over. They have every right to do that with this agreement with 90 days notice, and I get concerned. Again, I'd love to be thinking of this as we're all one big district, but I get concerned of 65 students in our program if there's a decision that they want to expand because they own, they're the primary owners, and with that, after the first year or whatever, they decide that they don't want to make that classroom available. Then we've got to provide we've got to take another strategy or another approach, which clearly happens now if day school's closed, but it's different in that we are investing in standing up a classroom, right, and investing in that with a full-time teacher that we then have to take responsibility for, of where do we put this classroom?
I also want to discuss at some point the undiscussed parts, and not for tonight, of how does this impact Park and Rice, if at all? What are the possible implications that this means for students who attend those schools, for 202's participation in anything related to those schools? I understand that. But the District 202 is making changes about how they're servicing and obviously creating some programmatic changes, and there's a long-term vision for that that may or may not be related to some services that are shared through some of our ventures now. And I think that has financial implications as well that need to be explored before we cross into some of this, because that, again, we're talking about over multiple years, we creep towards places where, what if they're not a partner in Park? What does that mean? That's a bigger conversation that I'm not sure we're prepared to discuss at this time.
I share all the concerns that have been raised, and, Joyce, I appreciate your taking kind of responsibility for the timing of this, but I would just offer that I think this board has been put in this position several times of feeling like we are being asked to make a decision with incomplete information or without sufficient time to really gauge stakeholder input on it. So I think this is a bigger issue that we need to address in just how we make decisions and how we gather input for it. In addition to that, I would say, I think I do have just the structure of this is odd to me because we are paying a per student, under the agreement we would be paying a per student tuition in addition to staffing it. And I think that touches a little bit to the questions that Candace raised about what are the services that ETHS would be providing, like why that model, when it seems in some ways it's almost maybe just like it's running a classroom at ETHS for our students, but it's not structured that way. So I think there are just some questions about why it's being structured this way and what the actual cost would be. I mean, I don't know how much conversation, and Meg, I see you're here, that there was with DEC leadership, because if we were having a DEC member, that's staffing this, and our other bargaining units who would be staffing that room, I think it's important to get that input in collaboration on what that means and how that would work, because ETHS, I think, has different hours. Would it be under ETHS hours? I think there's just a lot of questions that we would have to figure out, but I would want to have that discussion and figure that out before, as a board, we approved it. I also think, frankly, that we just need, as we're talking about kind of having another outplacement option within our district for students, we are placing more students out of district. Generally, over the years, that number has kept increasing. We have more self-contained classrooms. We are making global decisions about how we deliver special services that are impacting our community and our families, but I think we need to have a board-level discussion about what our vision is with special services and how we deliver them. And as we're, moving more kids out of the classroom as opposed to including them in, I think we just need to, it's a discussion we need to have, and I appreciate that these decisions are being made with the individual students in mind and what's in their best interest, and I think that's appropriate, but I think it's also appropriate for us to have a more global discussion of what kind of resources do we want to be able to put into special services and including kids and keeping kids in district and all of that sort of thing. So I think that, to me, is also making this uncomfortable to move forward on when we still, I think, have that broader discussion to be had.
A couple things. One is appreciate that people are recognizing positive intent in serving kids. I think that's, and I think that tone of the questions I appreciate very much. I think realistically, to take in a thoughtful way, the questions that are put on the table and to try to come back next week. We're not going to have all the answers and all of whether it's if I may, the substantive negotiations or sort of the logistical negotiations. That's not going to be finished by Wednesday night, which is when we submit reports so that we can get ready for the board. So I want to be sensitive to that and be sensitive to putting all the questions on the table. And actually, Suni, your last point is really well taken. It's a broader question. It's a broader set of policies and practices. And what are we doing as a district with regard to our special services, our special education programming that we need to continue? So I wonder if we should take a pause on this and make sure that we have, and we'll work with Adila, all the questions down so we can set up an agenda for how to pursue those questions. Joyce, you and I would have to also discuss for the couple families who see this as an option. We definitely don't want to have them fall flat on their faces because of the thoughtfulness by which we're approaching this as an opportunity and a challenge. So we'd want to make sure that we can, that those families have opportunities that are before them. But I think realistically to come back next Monday we can have a version of this conversation if we wish, or we can come back in August or September and really engage in a deeper conversation around the broader issues and the very specific ones. And quite frankly, being sensitive to the concerns that you as community representatives have raised, we'll know a little bit more about implementation of the day school as it opens up shop as well. So I would suggest just one, if there are other questions or concerns, please put them on the table. But that we wouldn't necessarily come back next week. We would actually make this part of the agenda for August or September or when we can, or even August, September, October, and then move towards something that would be implemented for the following year if we so wanted to implement.
I would push for having that conversation at the joint, so then that way we as two districts can work collaboratively, right? And you know, maybe this is the catalyst for 65 and 202 to really explore how we can better serve our students and families through special services. So I really think that'd be really great route to take.
Well, that's embedded in the intent. I mean, and again, the intent is there.
To have discussion and have a really detailed discussion as to how, you know, what our vision is. So I think it's important that we do that.
I would definitely agree with postponing this conversation until we're able to get some answers for the thoughtful questions that have been raised. I am curious how families for whom this option was presented will be circled back with and supported. So I would like to get some information about that before September. And there was the allusion and the reference to how we would be able to provide social work support, et cetera, but the budget in the plan that we received doesn't incorporate that. And so whatever we see in August or September, I would like for it to be comprehensive in terms of what we envision children and families will receive, what gap it's filling, and what the expense of that is, and how that's meeting, I guess, the expressed need, and how that need, I guess, was expressed by children and families. I hear the allusion to this being something that is deeply needed, that we're not able to provide, but I guess I'm not hearing and I don't want to hear about folks' private information, but what I'm not hearing is we explicitly have this expressed need, we're not able to meet it, and therefore this is the environment that we need. I don't understand, I don't see that that relationship or that case being made? That's what I'm curious to hear.
I'm not convinced from what Joyce said that we're not able to meet it. We potentially are able to meet it in day schools that are out of district. And so that's where we would get services for children who need these services. And this was an intent to stay local and an intent to provide services and an intent to be fiscally prudent. But again, I'm not arguing on that because I think the questions put on the table are important questions to pursue.
You said you don't, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the first part of what you said.
That services can be, if a child needs services and it's not the new opening day school, what would we do for the families? We would provide them with access to other day schools in the area.
Okay. So we're saying that we have the capacity to provide that service in this new building with one of our educators and with the special services that we have available? Is that what
No.
you're saying?
No, without this as an option, the district can provide these services to these
At another
students.
day school?
At
But
another
using
day
other
school.
day schools.
At another day school.
But I think I understand, Anya, the point you're getting at is that we're saying that we do have the staff and expertise to service these kids, just not the space. And that's why the day
Seems like that's what you
school
just said.
was an option.
So there's a number of things that are hanging out in this conversation, and instead of spinning, I'd like to amend this. And you guys tell me if you're okay with how I've amended it, and if so, then we can vote on it. The Finance Committee recommends that the intergovernmental agreement between ETHS and District 65 for use of the ETHS Day School be brought to the full board as an information discussion item and to a subsequent board meeting for action in the future.
Yes.
Is that what we're asking for? An opportunity to have information and discussion and then another board meeting to take action on it? Is that?
I think that's fine, but I do think that I would like to understand better Anya's question, or the answer to Anya's question of, so there are students who we were going to recommend this at this, the tuition cost plus whatever the staffing cost for us to staff that room. Now we're saying we're going to pay increased tuition costs to send them out of district?
Right. Correct.
So I guess I'm not, and I think this goes back to one of Joey's initial points. Is there no other special self-contained classroom that they can go into? There's no option. I know we have been moving more kids into Rice to provide some services to then better be able to integrate them back into their attendance area schools more quickly. And I guess I'm not clear why that isn't an option for these students.
I'm not sure I'm comfortable with placement conversations even globally happening right now.
Okay, that's fine. But I guess that's what I would hope
Fair
is
question, and I think that
that is before we say we are just going to place them out at the higher tuition cost at another day school, that we look at, if we felt we had the capacity to deal with it, if we just had the space, then is there a way that we can address the lack of space?
we're assuming that it's at a higher cost between the tuition and the staffing costs. I'm not sure that it's necessarily a higher cost. I'd like to see that breakdown at a future meeting as part of the information and discussion.
Understood, but I think there are still students
Oh,
that
there's
are
still
gonna be-
students that are and you guys are gonna handle the placement
Right.
process as you do.
Correct.
There, yeah.
Joey, before we, I know we got to vote on this, but whatever, vote on. But I do think, I wondered if, I know this is a little more informal, I don't know if we have anyone who wanted to speak to this agenda item so that we could take any questions or comments. Okay. Just so that we have additional input as we're, is that okay if we do that alongside the agenda item?
Yes.
Thanks.
Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. I'm Carrie Levin. I'm the Executive Director of Evanston CASE. We provide support and advocacy services for families whose children have disabilities in Evanston. Couple things. One is, I think all of the questions that you asked are exactly the right questions to ask. I want to say that the students that Joyce is talking about are kids who right now have needs right now, right? And that it isn't a matter of could we put them in a different self-contained classroom or something that we already have. If that were the case, she would have, right? And there are a variety of both programmatic and clinical reasons for that, which, you know, certainly the new SPED director or whoever would be equipped to explain. And so I also want to express that the ETHS Day School program is unfolding and evolving right now and is sort of an unknown entity in some important ways, in my opinion. And so even just trying to get it straight and right for the kids from the high school is going to be a challenge to begin with, right? And so I think discussing the finance around this is essential. It has to be done. But I think to Joyce's point, to her concern, to the social worker's concern, is that these are kids right now who have needs, and there's not an appropriate place within district to give them what they need. And so, and to understand, I do this professionally, that the landscape out there of options for therapeutic placements are getting smaller in our sort of catchment area, and that you're talking about a group of kids who are going to be more fragile, going to be kids who internalize. These are not going to be kids who sort of express their feelings in a behavioral, outward behavioral way. And so they need to be in a specialized environment with clinical staff and programming that can help them with the reasons behind that fragile space that they're in. I don't want to say too much, sorry. But I just want to emphasize that I'd like to see this board have a conversation about investment in programming for these children, okay? That needs to happen before October, November, December, in my opinion. And whether it's that you create a therapeutic placement kind of environment, and I'm not talking about self-contained, not that same model, I'm talking about a therapeutic, wraparound therapeutic model in one of our buildings, maybe. Maybe another space in the community. It's something that we need, and we needed even before any of this came up. Okay? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Stephanie Kimmel. Many of you have heard me speak about this before. I did come speak at the joint board meeting where this wasn't on the agenda, but it was on the next month. So, and I've been following it for since they first had hosted a parents engaged meeting at ETHS. And again, I don't have any children with who I anticipate will need this kind of services, but just the level of lack of transparency that District 202 has had around this whole process. And then, you know, seeing this pop up on the agenda for a finance committee on Friday, where the finance committee would be the first place it's discussed, seems really troubling to me. How it's unfolded, as Carrie said, at 202, there aren't going to be social workers. There is going to be one school psychologist. The other clinical services are sort of completely up in the air. They've said it will serve students with autism and emotional disability, but they haven't said more than that. They haven't really put that in writing. This is not the same intended group. Their intention sounds still like the social work services will be provided by existing social workers that are at the main building at ETHS. That just does not seem like it could possibly meet the needs of these types of kids that you're talking about. You know, and we all know some of them. They're in our schools, and we know their parents. The special ed community, I think a lot of people are afraid to speak out against these things because they don't want their IEP taken away. They want a good placement. It's really incumbent on all of you to really make sure that we're doing the best for these kids that can't, you know, and their families that can't speak out about this. I'm just continuing to be concerned that we're looking in a week where self-contained classrooms at 3 different schools in our district were like left out of their yearbooks. Like the concern that we pay to these children needs to be increased, and how we're going to do that by putting kids at a high school building that was poorly conceived. And I do believe that Evanston has the resources to do these things right. So let's just figure that out and not, do an agreement like this that doesn't make sense in the short term. Just take your time and look at this carefully, ask all the questions, and I know you guys can do the right thing.
Thank you, Stephanie.
So, I'm in agreement with you all wanting to get more information to look at this for the fall. But I want to be very clear that we place children into therapeutic day placements, as does the other districts that are quite a ways away, at great expense, and children, and very few of them, ever return to our schools and improve socially and academically. And it is a huge concern in terms of how we are treating some of our most vulnerable students. So I think that I agree, great care has to be given to how we look at this.
So the Finance Committee recommends that the intergovernmental agreement between ETHS and District 65 for use of the ETHS Day School be amended to say that, for that agreement to be brought to the full board as an information discussion item in a subsequent board meeting for action in the 2019-20 calendar year.
Tanya Birdie?
Yes.
Chow?
Yes.
Elkhorn?
Yes. Action item 7, the security contract with Phoenix. There was a memo, there was an RFP for security services. Can you give us the scope of what security services means?
Yes. What it is we've had the service with Phoenix. The company comes over the weekend and they check around the building to see if we have any problems with our heating system, our ACs are left on, or there are damages to the building. What they do, they alert business operations and maintenance and building personnel to make sure that we can respond to that very quickly. So they're the backup security for after hours for the district. We've always used their services, and they've been helpful over the years. And we just need to renew the agreement for the next couple of years.
And we also went out to bid.
Yes, we did. We went out to bid, and they were by far the lowest qualified bidder.
Any questions about that? All right, so the Finance Committee recommends that security contract with Phoenix be approved as presented.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Action item 8, the Zoom transportation to supplement taxis. Is it Zoom or Zoom?
Zoom.
It's gotta be Zoom. So tell us a little bit about this. This is also something new.
Right. Over the last few years, the district has actually spent a tremendous amount of money on taxes. And just last fiscal year, we spent close to $750,000 transporting kids by using taxis. And this year, we're on track to spend about $1 million on taxis. Now, the reason why those kids are transported, a lot of them are special education students who are transported in district. Some of them are special education students who are transported out of district. They are McKinney-Vento students who are transported, some of them to as far away as Indiana, some of them to as far away as the border between Illinois and Indiana. And some of the students who are also transported are students who have behavioral problem on the regular school bus. And the principal have requested that they write the taxes until they can figure out the best way to help them behave better on the buses. And we also transport our students who go to ETHS for curriculum. So those are the curriculum shuttles. And sometimes we also transport parents for various reasons who have no means of coming to meetings or attending conferences with our colleagues in the schools. So since we've looked at the rate of taxes provided by 202 as rising, and the need for students to write taxes in the district is going up, we're trying to look for an alternate way of still providing the services that are required by students and doing it in a way that is cost effective. So in doing the research, we reach out to a firm out of Northern California, Zoom. Zoom has a platform which is similar but it's very different from Uber or Lyft. And what they do, they have a group of parents, mostly. A lot of them are former teachers or people who've worked with children in the past. And they provide transportation services from home to whatever place those students need to go to at a rate that is much cheaper than what we can do with taxis. Now, when we first reached out to the firm, we gave them a laundry list of things that we need in order to feel comfortable with the firm providing us the services. We asked for an extensive insurance protection. We asked for a background check. We asked for a licensor from the state of Illinois, Secretary of State. We asked for the drivers to be trained as certified school bus driver, which our current taxi provider, they don't even do. We asked for those drivers to have training, first aid, and just a whole list of things. So the firm came back. We've been talking to them for close to a year now. The firm came back and actually exceeded all the expectations the requirements that we made of them. And so currently, the company is working at, I believe, 20 school districts outside of Illinois. And they're all over California. I know they're in San Diego, they're in Palo Alto, and they're also in Dallas. They're currently talking to CPS too to try to provide some of the same thing for CPS. So, any questions?
Is there anything in this proposal from them that helps mitigate the risk of them being us being the first Illinois client to them?
No, not specifically.
Particularly because it's transportation, and I know when the buses are running, you've got point people on the ground who are monitoring buses that are local, that can help with communication and especially in emergencies. If you've got taxis going on, it's a California-based company. Our cabs are running at 7:30 in the morning. It's 5:30 there. Do you actually have somebody who's available to triage?
Yes, absolutely. If you look at the PowerPoint that was included as part of the memo, the way that is done is the parents are actually provided apps, and that the same apps are reflected on the dashboard of the driver. And you have a live operator on each ride that's actually monitoring, and the parent can monitor in real time the movement of the cars from point A to point B, and a live operator that can be called based here in Evanston.
The live operator
yes, based here in Evanston that will provide support.
At their cost, at our cost?
At their cost. It's all baked into the price that we're provided. And that person can interact directly with parent if we want them to, or they can interface with our transportation coordinator, Lou Gatter, and provides real-life, on-time information.
When we met with the team, part of this is conceptually it has a platform similar to Uber or Lyft, but it's not Uber or Lyft. So it's not hit the button and then driver A will come, tomorrow driver B will come, the next day driver Q will come. They actually engage folks who will be driving and put them on regular routes so they actually will be driving the regular routes. And then the next question we asked was, well, what if driver A is sick or isn't available? Then they have a backup system where they have driver B who also knows the kid as well. So they work through that, and they've had some good success to it.
Who's our current provider?
303.
Three.
is there a role for us to, does it have to be all or nothing? Can we take a part of this? Can we keep 303 and do, 10%, 20% of the rides?
That's interesting. In having a conversation with the firm, what I suggested that would be a good thing for us to do is to scale it. So we can start out this summer and maybe give them 0.25% of the transportation that we need to do this summer. Depending on how well they perform, we can scale up to 50% at the beginning of next school year. And depending on how they perform, then we can look at maybe giving it all to them. But I was thinking the same thing. They know they're improving to us. But if you look at the requirements they have, it's much more stringent than what's required of a taxi driver. But since we've never done business before with them, I thought the best approach is to scale it. Start with 1/4, go up to 50%, and maybe go up to 3/4 after that, and then scale up to 100% depending on how well they perform.
One last question, and I'm sure there's other questions. Have you asked them about what they can provide us, maybe financially, given that we'll be their first Illinois client? Because I'm sure there's a benefit to them being landing a seat in Illinois.
What we've asked them is the price they've quoted us is actually 15% minimally lower than what we're already paying. Now, if we think about the fact that we're going to pay $1 million this year, so that means next year it's going to be 15% lower than that $1 million.
If they do 100% of the rides.
If they do 15% of whatever we're paying. So if we do 1/4, it'll be 15% of the 1/4 that we're currently paying to 303. And that's just, they gave us the worst case scenario. So chances are, which they've talked to us about, those savings are actually going to be lower. They're going to be more, than the 15%. So the worst case scenario is 15% savings. So there's a very good possibility we'll be looking at 25 to 30% in savings. And the reason why they felt so confident in the ability to save the district so much money is the platform that they use. The folks who fired the company, the lady who actually fired the company was, I believe, was a Google employee who went to school to get an MBA from Stanford. And when she decided to go back to work, she was having a problem being able to transfer her kids back and forth while she went back to work. And she saw an idea, and she partnered with another employee who actually developed maps for Google. And that's one of their secret sauce that they use. They try to optimize the movement of people from point A to point B in a very efficient way using technology. One thing else that I would like to point out is they actually funded by Sequoia VC, which is also the firm that funded Amazon. They did the first round funding for Google for just about all the major technology firms in the country right now. So they come with a lot of technology know-how, with a lot of resources, and I believe the ability to be able to serve the district well and to save money and provide better ride experience for our students.
I appreciate the phasing in suggestion, and indeed, in the time that Raphael's been at the district, the costs with our local taxi service has gone up exponentially. And so what we're trying to do is find an alternative and creative solution. We want to be careful, that's the clarion call, but do that in a way that would be safe and make sure our kids get picked up and get to school and would be cost effective.
So you talked about some of the transportation costs being for adults, right?
Yes.
Are you talking about adults for participation in programs?
Adult, in some cases, who are attending IP conferences and things like that, who have no access to
Right.
transportation. So we know public transportation here in town is very spotty. So
Right.
those will pay for a cab.
Okay, and I know we have some other programs that pay for transportation, but my understanding was that that was covered by grants.
We
But-
also-
Yeah, okay, I wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
I agree with the comments on scaling. I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, I've been flabbergasted over the years about the lack of competition in the transportation market and quite frankly, the monopoly that exists, or duopoly, or whatever you want to call it. And so I really appreciate a creative solution and some alternatives coming to market, which sounds like it's not only a financial benefit, but you're looking at folks who are more equipped and better understanding of kids' needs and families' needs. So if we're able to, move into it slowly and still have a next best alternative, if it doesn't work, I can't see how it could be anything but a good decision. So appreciate Raphael and the team, coming up with that and working on it for the year. So thanks.
Did you get a chance to talk to any of the references from districts of comparable size?
Yes, we did. We did. Nothing but great things to say about it.
And they have the supply of drivers.
They believe they will. What they claim to us is they actually pay. The payment model always different from Uber or Lyfters. They actually pay them a set amount. So they tell them, for example, you work from X hours every morning and every afternoon to pick up and drop off. And they pay them a set amount, so you don't have to wait till they turn on their meter to get paid. So that encourages folks, especially moms whose children are in school, who have to drop in other kids, they're not really doing it, an opportunity to make extra money and be engaged with children.
Might just be another good reason to phase it in, just
See what
because every market's different. So.
Correct. All right,
Oh,
so,
can I just make one quick, more of a point than a question, but just, noting that I think similarly to the conversation we had before and trying to get to analyze why we have so many more students who are being placed out of district, I think better understanding why our taxi costs have gone up so much over the years is an analysis we should probably do sooner rather than later and try to figure out, obviously, for students to get to their day schools or whatever, that's something we need to do. But if there are other transportation costs that may not be as essential, that we are currently have just kind of creeped up, I think it's worth at this point revisiting that and seeing if there is a way to reduce those overall costs.
I've tried. I've engaged in, I hate to say Mortal Kombat, to try to get the cost down, because it's just the nature of our work to be efficient and to try to save the taxpayers' money. And the majority of the folks that we transport are actually special education students. If it's written into the IEP, by law, we have to provide them the transportation. So we have a lot of that. Also, McKinney-Vento. The students that we transport right now, the way they get around is not contiguous. There's no way we can use buses or any other modes of transportation because they're spread all over the place. So we've looked at this very seriously, and the request normally comes from one of the special service supervisor, and we always ask a lot of questions to try to see the alternatives that we can employ to try to reduce that cost. One thing that we are doing that's related to that is we currently have a group of kids who are being transported to Nichols for whatever reason by taxis. We've talked to a bus company to try to see if they can provide a smaller bus that will be able to do that and reduce the cost of taxes. So we're looking at that. We're looking at different ways to save money as much as possible. But we also have to make sure that we abide by the law in making sure students are transported to school.
Thank you.
I wanted to know, there's a push in the rideshare industry to unionize and to make sure, so then part of the reason why the taxi costs are going up, because again, they're being displaced by the gig economy. So just putting that out there, that again, what we may see in cost savings now, we might lose out because we want to make sure that folks are getting a livable wage. And I appreciate the model that again is going to employ, hopefully, really push to employ local, local moms and families, so giving another economic opportunity to folks in our community. But at the same time, we want to do the right thing and make sure that this is fair for all folks involved, drivers, families, and the district's finances.
That's such an important point, and it seems like when we pick up the phone and call the folks at Zoom, we can talk about cost controls as well. And if we phase in and you're successful and we keep phasing in, but we don't want to see it pop up 3 years from now, otherwise we're stuck right back where we were.
And again, this is another thing that we can maybe talk to at the joint board, where we work as institutions, and maybe the city of Evanston is, we can work on an intergovernmental agreement where we split the cost if that to again, spread the cost among the institutions, so.
To your point, and when we had the conversations with them too, we requested that they engage local residents. We also requested that they make sure the folks that work with our kids also reflect the community that we live in, and also provide us bilingual drivers, and they promise to try to do all those things.
Thank you.
All right. The Finance Committee recommends that the contract with Zoom Transportation to supplement taxis be approved as presented.
Second. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. ESS substitute contract.
So I'm sure everyone around this table recognizes that for the last several years, we've had a very big issue with retaining enough substitutes to cover the number of absences that we have on a daily basis. This is not just a District 65 issue, this is a state of Illinois issue because we just have a substitute shortage. We've tried different ways to address this problem. We've tried to increase the number of substitutes in our pool, and honestly, just because of the nature of the work, it's very fluid. It's hard to maintain. We've had a hard time maintaining enough substitutes to cover our absences. So ESS is an educational staffing solutions company. They are new to Illinois. This is due to a new law that was passed in January that would allow school districts to actually contract out for their substitute services. And we're excited to perhaps be the first, which I know can make some folks nervous, but they're in over 26 states. They're with over 650 schools, districts much larger than ours, as well as districts smaller than ours. I think some of the advantages to using this, this company is that they are able to provide some other opportunities for their substitutes that we, at this particular point, cannot. So they focus entirely on substitutes, so they're dedicating 100% of their time to recruitment of just substitutes. They are able to provide more ongoing training for their substitutes. They're able to do some evaluation of their substitutes. They're able to provide benefits to their substitutes that we're not able to provide, and they're also able to provide some other incentives. So they are spending 100% of their time on their substitutes, which I would love to be able to spend 100% of our time on substitutes, but we're not able to. We would have an on-site person, that's part of the contract, so that would help with making sure that some of the pressures that are currently sitting on our secretaries and our principals can be mitigated by having that on-site person. They're going to have a full transition team. Let me see what else. Their hope is to engage our community as much as possible. They're hoping that for our accounts manager, they're very interested in trying to hire someone from our community, as well as making sure that as many of substitutes as possible can be hired from the Evanston-Skokie area, as well as they'll branch out to other areas. But they're really trying to make this like a community-based substitute pool, recognizing that people from the community are invested in the community, and they're really hoping to move in that direction. So this is coming to the committee for just consideration, and if you're open to passing it to the full board next week for approval. But we don't, at this particular time, in terms of trying to determine, you know, there can always be challenges, but we do see that there are good opportunities and that can help mitigate some of the significant issues that we have. Our current District 65 substitutes would be offered the opportunity to be employed with ESS, so there's not a loss there. And again, if they are brought on, then they do get benefits that they're currently not getting with us. For our administrators, hopefully it will minimize the additional work associated with trying to provide last-minute substitute coverage, and as well as for our teachers who are currently taking on additional work by accepting substitute assignments. And so it's not just teachers, but it's also paraprofessionals. Those are the absences that we're focusing on right now.
One benefit, if I can, that it provides to potential substitute, currently, if a subs for a school district, there's TRS taken out because of your license to be able to substitute. By working for a third-party private firm, they don't have to pay TRS. So those subs get to keep more of their money than what they currently do now. So that's one advantage to a substitute that may make it easier for them to want to work for a private third-party firm as opposed to a school district.
Questions?
Thanks, Beatrice. I have just more of a question around, I know we can terminate the contract with 90 days notice, performance, but are there any service level of agreements that we've discussed, especially in terms of, we've had situations where we can't staff a sub, and then we have, obviously that's been a kind of issue in teachers and other, the actual schools trying to figure out how to do that coverage, and you're talking here about that cost to that, and the assumption is that we won't have that cost, but what happens if, and what service level agreements do we have in place as part of the contract if that does continue to be a problem, and the order of magnitude of that problem is not much less than what we have or more than, how do we get compensated for that as part of the contract, or short of just canceling the contract, how can we monitor that, that issue, because it obviously is a very timely issue, especially for and cumbersome issue for our educators as well as our principals, and if you can't place the sub, what do we do? Or what do we do when we have several people where you can't get a sub, and we've had situations like that? How are we confident that this is going to be better, and what is in the contract to make sure that we have either a carrot or a stick to make sure that it's better?
Right.
And I've been in conversation with the firm to negotiate the contract, the terms of the contract. And what I want to point out is they were actually one of the critical party in getting House Bill 4742 passed in the state of Illinois. They've done this just about all over the country. They wanted to come, this is all they do. They wanted to come in here and do this in the state of Illinois. They were able to push to get the law passed. They were able to get waiver for them to start using us right away instead of waiting for later. They were able to get that with ISB. I say that to say they're in the business of finding us subs. If they don't find a sub, which I made it very clear to them, they are a bit, we will terminate their contract with them. So they have to perform for us or we won't use them anymore. And we will be one of their first major school districts in the state of Illinois to use them. So I think we count a lot to their credibility and the ability to be able to grow and develop their business. So we made that very clear to them. So since that is their sole business, substitute placement, if they don't place substitute, they lose our business, and we'll make it clear to our colleagues in the arena of public education that they are not worth the contract that they signed. So that's kind of my response to the question that you asked. Because if they're not successful, we'll start doing business with them, and we'll let everyone who needs to know that they're full of it.
But then we have to transition back to our own system,
Yes.
and so there will be a cost, an opportunity cost of us. So it's not just as easy as miraculously we have the old system set up and it's stood up. So that's why I just ask for service level agreements, because you don't want to ideally just terminate. Sometimes you want to have some warning that this is happening and have a way for them to rectify, but also for us to mitigate the cost that it's direct and indirect that we're having because they haven't performed at the same level. And, like you said, this is a statewide problem. They may be doing this 100% of the time, but they're not going to be certifying new teachers. Like, they're going to be dealt with the pool that exists in the state. So there's only so much they can do, so they can't make miracles happen.
But I think the big difference is, to what Beatrice just said, on a good day, we probably have one person dedicated to trying to find us a substitute. We have a firm made up of hundreds of people. That's their core competency. They don't do anything else. And they have a team of people. This is all they do, find a substitute. So by the fact that they have all these resources dedicated to that, resources we can't match. Our thinking is worth trying to see if you're successful. It couldn't be any worse than what we do.
Well, and I think we can measure, we can do some measurement though here. So we can do the fill rates. We can do the fill rates that, in a typical month, so take September, October, we can see what we fill, what we don't fill. And then as they get kicked up, we can see what they're doing and not. And that's the pressure point that Candace is suggesting, which is.
Do you retain control of ASAP, or do they take control of ASAP?
So, two parts. So they are in control of ASAP, but we still have full access to ASAP. So we
So you can still run
we
the
share
operational
access. We can
reports
still
to do
look at the
that.
reports, yes, and employees will still be entering their own absences. I mean, this year alone, our fill rate, unfortunately, is hovering around like 65%. And I know that, looking at other districts where they've worked, they have gotten to a point over time where they're in the 90%, 95% fill rates. I mean, that's what we're looking for. And again, I would say that there's multiple issues to kind of look at with regards to, maybe looking more deeper as to why do we have so many more absences? Are there other ways we can try and address absences across, different groups? But at the end of the day, I based on where we are right now, I think this is a good opportunity to try something that could have a really great impact for our district. And
Plus, they
we
get
have a lot
paid
of
based on the
stress,
number of subs
pressure.
they fill, by the way. So if they don't fill, they don't get paid. So that's another incentive that we have written in there.
And that was the only question I had was, what's the risk if they do absolutely nothing once we sign a contract with them?
They get no money.
They get no money.
And we
That's pretty
go
cool.
back to where we are.
So my major question was the question you just answered about their record elsewhere in terms of the fill rate, I think is what you described it as. And their record, I think you said, are with districts that are bigger, smaller, and similarly sized, just not in the state of Illinois.
Correct. And so, because that law came into effect January 1st of 2019, and I mean, I know that they're looking at some other districts and they're talking, they're courting them, but we would, if this were approved next week, we would be there first.
Do they have a history of getting to this 90% fill rate at districts that previously had low fill rates?
Yes, and I think that's one of the reasons why other districts also went with them, because they've experienced similar pains as we are, and saw it as a good option, and have had success.
Having sat through negotiation discussions where we talked about the substitute crisis, I definitely appreciate that there is a creative solution being brought forward. I am curious, and Meg, as you're sitting here, did you have an opportunity to look through the proposal prior to today? No. Okay. Okay. And I guess, did you have any concerns?
It's like a good opportunity. I do think, one thing that seems really nice is that there's benefits, there's, a bigger package of incentives that I do like the training that I think would be really good. I think the one question I was going to ask was about evaluation.
Yeah, so I think working with them and the account manager to see if there are opportunities for them to go in and actually observe subbing in, as substitutes as they are working in the classroom. But then another aspect of that is our feedback. So right now, teachers can give feedback. We probably will do some revision to that tool, but getting feedback from teachers as well as administrators.
So that would still be an option?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I think the only thing that we've, as with any of our hiring, sort of like they were saying with the, the transportation option, we would want to make sure that we're also looking to hire, we would hope that the substitute pool would reflect our students as well.
Yes, and that's another reason why they want to try and recruit from our community so that the demographics are comparable.
Yeah, no, I think anything's worth trying.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. And I did want to ask, I liked the ongoing training, and I think I saw in the proposal that they could provide district-specific specific training as well. So how, I guess, and I don't even know how that works with our current substitutes, if they get any training like on equity
Yeah.
trainings or our PBIS, all of that. How would that work?
So I would say a few things. They have training that comes with onboarding. They have the mandated trainings that staff are required to do. When we did a survey in the past, it was last year, those were some of the questions we asked. And we know that they would like, our current subs at the time said they would like to have more professional development with restorative practices and with special education, and part of, our challenge has been coordinating that and getting it done in a time when, because during the day you need them in the classroom. So we've just had some challenges, but in speaking with this company and sharing some of our thoughts and how to move forward, they're very interested in working with us and figuring out opportunities to then coordinate that training with their substitutes, which of course they would pay for them to attend those trainings as well.
Yeah.
And I heard you mention restorative justice and special education beyond diversity.
So that's a good question. I'd have to talk to them to see how that training could come to pass, and maybe it's something where we can start working on that this summer to see if we can get it scheduled or what that would look like. I do agree it would be important for them to go through that as well.
Okay. I think it's important to have a pool of people that reflect the demographics of our community, but reflecting the demographics of the community alone doesn't ensure that an racial equity focus will be a part of one's practice. So I think it's important that we also make sure we provide the training and the guidance in terms of what our values are.
Yes, I agree.
Thanks.
All right. The Finance Committee recommends that the ESS substitute contract be approved as presented.
Second.
Yes.
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 Thanks, Beatrice.
Housekeeping supply bid recommendation. We got a memo on this one?
Every year, the district goes out and buys cleaning supplies that are required to keep our facilities clean. And this year was no different. We did an RFP that was published in a local newspaper. We received responses from different companies. And I'm happy to say the lowest responsive bidders for the paper towel, for toilet tissue, and can liner, as well as the can liners, was actually won by a minority women-owned vendor here in Evanston. So that makes me very proud to recommend that. And we also have another vendor, Buckeye, be the lowest responsive bidder for hand soaps. And then for the floor wax and floor strippers, was Warehouse Direct.
Any questions? Great. The Finance Committee recommends that the housekeeping supply bid recommendation be approved as presented.
Second.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. All right, for discussion, the projected actuals fiscal year 19 and draft tentative budget fiscal year 20.
So tonight we have, Paul, do you want to start or?
You can dive right in.
So this is a draft of the draft budget. So when we meet next time, the numbers will look different because we still have a month. We still have very large June payrolls to be posted. But we would like to show you our estimates for the current fiscal year and then walk you through our assumptions for the next year's budget. And I'll try to be brief. And I just want to remind everyone that it's been 2 years since taxpayers of Evanston and Skokie passed operating rate referendum. And thanks to the referendum funding, we are projected to have true balanced budgets through FY '23 and balanced budgets with reserves through fiscal year '24 and '25. How did we do financially in FY '19? So we are projected to collect 99% of our operating revenues and spend 99% of our expenditures. Our budget had a 4.4 million surplus. We are projecting to end a little bit better, 4.7, and of course this additional surplus will be added to referendum reserves and used in the future to offset operating deficits. And 1% is amounts to about $1 million. It's quite a bit. And as you can see, let me see if I can point. I don't think I can. I don't think it's working. The top row in this table illustrates negative variance in our revenues, about 950,000. We are expecting to have some uncollected property taxes, primarily from the 2017 levy. Our district, and I know a lot of other districts, are experiencing a very extraordinary amount of tax refunds, rebates. That's not something that we can control. I mean, the money is just deducted from our revenue that we get. So there we are expecting approximately $1 million in uncollected 2017 levy. Also, our lunch sales are lower. There was a new law that passed last year. I'm not going to go into details, but basically as a result, we are experiencing less revenues for our lunches. Also, there was a change in our childcare, before and after school childcare program. Our parents have more options. They can choose 3-day option versus 5. And as a result, we did have some families that went from the 5-day option to 3, and we're losing revenues. I mean, we have, and we also have slightly smaller participation this year. We went from about 640 students participating to 618. So it's all reflecting in the amounts. On the expenditure side, it's actually a positive variance. We're projecting at this time that we will be spending less in supplies. And we also have smaller expenditures for special education tuition. As you remember, over the years, this number fluctuates. Sometimes we're way over budget, and then we under, and it's just because the number of students changes. They are often added mid-year, way after we approve the budget. So again, this year, good news on that front. I think we're going to be spending less.
So if I can, I feel compelled to speak to the lower than expected collection in lunchroom sale. A law was passed that took effect this year that limits what can be done by school district to collect on unpaid lunch expenditure. What it essentially says is that a student or family that they can owe up to $500, and you have to keep serving them. And the only recourse you then have is to talk to the comptroller and try to see if the comptroller can prevent their tax refund or any other refund that they have coming from the state from going to them. And what the comptroller said is she's got a lot of stuff to worry about. This is not one of her worries. So, for example, last year we had about $2,000, I believe, in uncollected lunch money. Today we have $21,000. So, and I expect that to keep growing as a result of this law.
This is the same information for those of you that are more visual. I like to see charts. The blue is the budget, the red is the actuals, and again we have a negative variance on the left side and then positive variance. So hopefully there's going to be a wash. This slide just illustrates where these shortages take place. So property taxes, the biggest source of our revenue. It doesn't look like a lot, like that variance is a lot, but it's going to be about 700,000. I think in property taxes, and then the rest in local revenues. Same thing for expenditures. And again, this slide just shows our expenditures by categories and where these shortages fall. So unless there are questions about FY19, I'm going to move to FY20 budget highlights, and that's going to be our 18th consecutive balanced budget with revenues exceeding expenditures by 6.7 million. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're not planning to spend that surplus. As board directed us to do 2 years ago, we're going to save the money, put it to the side, and use it in the future. Student enrollment is projected to increase by 131 students. That's actually a lot more than in the last few years. And also, as you can see, the budget is aligned with district spending priorities, and it's going to support many of our initiatives. And you can read the memo about the initiatives, and just to name some few initiatives, primarily improving instructional core, improving organizational and building culture. Of course, we focus on equity, and we're going to be working hard to straighten our multi-tier system of support. Moving to the numbers, operating revenues are projected to increase by 5% over current year actuals, primarily because of higher CPI, 2.1, as well as the expiration of the Washington National TIF. That TIF will be generating about $2 million. It's valued, the value has grown over the years, is around $64 million, and the TIF is expiring, the first year the TIF is added to the tax rolls is actually outside the tax caps, so it's not subject to the 5% limit. So we will be able to capture that revenue. CPI for the rest of the property taxes, 2.1%, and of course our investment income is still going strong. And this is just a slide of CPI history. The district has been really lucky. I mean, we had 3 years of very strong CPI. If you look back, the 10-year CPI average is about 1.5, 1.6. This, of course, will not continue. And these CPIs, 2.1, 1.9, they will be affecting next year and the year after. And for the projections, we are using 1.5%. Evidence-based funding replaced general state aid in 2017, and because District 65 is now considered Tier 4 school district, our chances of getting new funding are very small. Today, actually, I think it's today, right, that the new state budget was approved. There's actually, I believe, 350 million for evidence-based funding. Will we be getting a chunk of this? I doubt it, because it's probably going to go to Tier 1 and 2 school districts, and then whatever is left, Tier 3 and 4. Other revenues are projected to be pretty much flat. This pie chart just shows you that how strongly we depend on property taxes. This is our biggest but also the most stable revenue source. 79% of our revenue comes from property taxes. Moving to expenditures, they are increasing by 4% over FY19 actuals and 3% over the last year's budget. The primary driver are staffing costs. Because we are still in negotiations with our educators unions and with our paraprofessional unions, these costs are estimated. There are also 10 new positions in the budget. Our benefits, of course, are going up. Raphael mentioned cost of transportation. That's probably going up easily by 250,000. And unless we see true savings from implementing Zoom, we cannot just assume that they're going to happen. So we have to budget on assuming there will be no savings. Also, districts' facilities, they need repairs, and we have to increase allocation next year for a lot of repairs and maintenance. Also, there will be one-time costs. We allocating funding for new student data system. District has been searching for new software for many, many years. So hopefully next year that's going to happen. Science adoption, and we also changing classroom libraries. And this is the list of the positions, new positions. I mentioned 10, but actually it's the net 8. 2 will be redefined. 4.5 positions are being added because of student enrollment and student needs. 4 positions are added because of the strategic priorities, and then 1.5 because of grant funding and efficiencies. Another pie chart, just showing our audience, the board, that 80% of our budget is spent on staffing. Only 17% of our budget is spent on tangible items and services. So we are very labor intensive.
In the people business.
Yes, we are in the people's business. We included a copy of the projections that were presented to you in February. We felt that because it's a draft budget, and the biggest expense in our budget is being estimated, we want to wait until we get more clarity on this expenditure and bring it to you in August with updated financial projections. But if you look at the financial projections, what we had for our budget in financial projections is actually very close. We were projecting, and I can't really point, I'm too far, but the top row, the operating revenues, we are projecting 140.9 in revenues. The budget actually has 140.2, so under percent variance, and we are hoping to stay there. Same thing for expenditures. Actually, the way our budget is presented today, there is no difference. I'm sure it's going to change because, again, salaries will be updated. We know the cost of our benefits, but again, we're still working on a lot of pieces of the budget. And if you look at the projections that we presented in February, we are projecting balanced budgets through the end of FY22, true balanced budgets, meaning we will have enough revenues to cover annual expenditures. And then using reserves, we are hoping to stay balanced through FY25. And this document has been in our presentations for actually a couple years, but it just illustrates board's commitment to preserving referendum reserves, and because of that commitment, we are tracking the referendum reserves, and we want to report to you again, this is not final, that we were projecting, we started with 18.5 in July, and we were budgeting 3.1 of surplus to be added to the reserves, but we think it's going to be better. It's going to be about 3.4 million, which is 300 more. So we are on track in preserving and building our referendum reserves bank. And there are, of course, a lot of uncertainties. One thing that I want to point out that is still in this draft budget is the pension cost shift. I don't think it's going to happen, especially with the budget being passed today. It's going to be taken out. That's approximately 370,000 less in expenditures, and then, of course, appropriate adjustments going forward. We do want to keep it in our projections because the number is not huge. That's why we don't even attempt to include property tax freeze. We never did because the amounts were just so large. But we want to let you know that that's still not completely resolved and may happen. And then, of course, the usual suspects, the CPI factor. This year, it's the cost of staffing, and we don't know what's going to happen with future federal funding. But the state funding looks promising, actually. When we look at the state budget, there is additional money for early childhood, even for transportation. So that's really, that really feels good that there may be some desire to reinstate some of these cuts over the years because the state education funding has been cut basically since 2008.
Even when it wasn't cut, it wasn't funded.
It wasn't funded, exactly.
On the property tax freeze, the governor is going to convene a task force on it that will run simultaneous with the effort to raise income taxes through the constitutional amendment. And so there's political back and forth on the horse trading will be freeze property taxes to increase the income tax, but none of that's going to happen this coming year. And the item for the income tax will come in November of 2020.
And this is our final slide, just illustrates the next step in the budget building and adopting process. We will have a meeting on August 12th with the tentative budget and then a public hearing and budget adoption in September. Any questions?
I had one question, and that was, there was costs referred to, or increase in costs, and or increase in expenditures, and one of the things that was noted was maintenance of buildings. The bond that or the refinancing of the bond that we voted on was meant to cover our capital, not all of our needs, but it's meant to address increase in expenditures around capital needs, correct?
Yeah, I think there are two things, if I can separate it, please. The capital is to make major improvements. And I think what we're referring to in the budget is just to do day-to-day repairs that we need, that have been deferred for so many years that is finally catching up to us. For example, HVAC repairs that we need to do. There are just a lot of things in our buildings that we need to do small repairs. Capital are the big ones. And the big things are what we were scheduled to use the proceeds from the bond refunding on.
Because by law, we're not even allowed to use capital proceeds to do repairs. They have to be replacement or capital structure type of improvements.
And the referendum dollars that we have set aside.
That's to augment that capital.
Right, so it's all for capital.
So for the point you're raising, we have a levy that funds operations and maintenance. We can use the proceeds of those levies to do repairs. What we've done is things have been so thin the last few years, we just haven't kept up. We have a lot of very old buildings that needs just daily repairs that we just haven't kept up. So we're trying to do some of that with the budget allocation this year.
And also the budgets were cut. I mean, I know it's hard to believe, but the budget for buildings and grounds in 2001 was the same size as it is now. And with all that square footage that we added, and the costs, are so much higher now for all services, because over the years, that was usually the first place that was reduced. I mean, beyond yeah.
Just to give you a concrete idea, we have 18 buildings, 17 of which we are responsible for taking care of because the 18th one is Rice. Of those 17 buildings that we have, we have 3 maintenance guys, just to give you an idea. If we need to do some carpentry work, if we need to do plumbing work, if we need to do outside masonry, if we need to do any of those things, there are those 3 guys who have to do it in 7 to 8 buildings. And we know that's just not even close to being enough.
And that's just for day-to-day, week-to-week
Day-to-day,
wear and tear.
yeah.
I'm sorry, so this is the explanation of the maintenance specialist?
That's the reason why we have 1 position included there as a new position. And what that will actually be revenue neutral. Because what we've been reduced to doing, since we don't have enough people, we outsource a lot of that. And trade people, especially the last few years, as the economy is doing really well, they charge a lot of money for our day-to-day things. If we were to hire someone who works for us at least 40 hours a week, they can give us more for less.
So just to clarify then, so it's money that would be going towards these repairs anyway, we're just doing it in a
And
different...
we'll be able to do more of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just had 2 questions. One, Kathy, was to your point about the pension cost shift. So it's clearly not going to happen for 1920 that we're going into. So why wouldn't we remove it from the projections for 1920? I realize it's not a big amount, but
It's going to
370.
be removed from the budget, but then we will keep the 0.5% in starting with FY '21.
Okay. So whenever the next round comes, it won't be in 20 for the actual budget. That was my question, removing it from 20. Okay, Alex. And then the second thing was just more about going back to the FTE shifts. Right here, okay. The second category around strategic priorities, can you explain a little bit more what the 3 assistant principals for special services and restorative practices are? And
Angelique, do you want to answer that question?
are, what, I'm not sure. Grammar is? Are.
Well, we heard concerns regarding wanting to have support at our buildings for our principals, as well as our goal is to make sure that we have an administrator in each building who is there, who is well resourced and trained in terms of special education. We've talked about wanting to make sure that our special ed students are owned by everybody, and we are hoping that having a special ed administrator that can help on-site do the IEP meetings, can work for inclusion going on within buildings, can work with staff regarding needs regarding special ed students will really be helpful. That person will also, though, serve as an assistant principal and will do the evaluations of special ed staff, and similarly will be one of the co-leads for restorative practices within each of the buildings. We've developed a pretty intensive plan for how we want to move forward with restorative practices, and buildings will need support by somebody who's trained to do the restorative practices work to really roll out some of the issues that we've talked about in terms of our discipline policy, and for that to be effective.
Is there a follow-up question?
Well, is it the model then would these folks be, 3 obviously isn't per school, so how, would they be shared across multiple schools? Is it targeted schools?
So what, part of what Joyce described was that it's going to be important, in order to achieve the model, we're not hiring for every single school. So number 1, this year, we did sort of a pilot where we had 2 or 3 special ed supervisors who were able and are scheduled to accommodate, in addition to being the LEA, the supervisor for a building, they spend an extra day in that building providing administrative support. They didn't carry the responsibility of evaluation or any of the additional burdens or work that's required. However, in thinking ahead. So that was just to see what it would be like for somebody to be in multiple sites and to also learn from that what would be the impact and the support. And so in all the sites, it was extremely welcome. So that was a positive in terms of staff and in terms of even parents or some of the feedback we got, and also from administrators. So then what we did is we thought, given the audit that Joyce engaged in terms of visiting schools, recognizing the challenges around, who's kind of owning the special education needs in the space, and how do we increase the conversation and the sense of engagement and ownership of that in a building, and support for staff and for students. We made the decision to explore this idea of special ed supervisors, and in order to achieve this, they will have greater responsibility in an individual building versus being split in multiple buildings. So a special education supervisor may now play more of an administrator role for special services in a building for 4 days or for 3 days, and then be in a different building for 2 days. So we're we're covering our bases across all our schools by transitioning what were special ed supervisors into being much more focused in one building for an increased number of days, where they're playing a role of an administrator in that building.
And for those schools that don't have a second administrator, so Kingsley, Lincolnwood, what am I missing?
Walker.
Warrington,
and
Walker.
And Chute also doesn't have a second.
No, Chute has a second one, but
Dawes.
Dawes. We would have a second player who would be working as an administrator, but focused on special needs, focused on the restorative practices, focused on behavior issues. And what colleagues have done has been really creative in working on this, while we've said we have to do this in as cost-efficient a process as can be. And I think board members will remember when we got to this chart last year, this was a quite significant number of FTEs. And so we, as a senior team, said, we're going to start with 0, and we will add where there are absolute needs for enrollment, which is what the first bucket is. And then after several observations at the school site, conversation with the board, that's where we add the 3+1 in the middle bucket to be able to address some of the concerns that have been raised to us.
Will those be what I heard was, so are these going to be net new or shift in responsibility of supervisors to assistant?
Combination of both.
So the 3 is net new.
Correct.
No, it
No.
says 2 are
Two
budget
are
neutral.
Two are budget
So that
neutral.
would mean 1 plus 1 coach.
1 net new.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we really hope that some of the things that have come up in terms of discipline, in terms of safety, in terms of, making sure that we consider special education students in all of our decision-making within the schools, as well as having what will be special education staff evaluating other special education staff, we think is really, we hope will support the work that we want to do. And the restorative practices piece, as Teresa Megan shared with you a few weeks ago, is big work. It's a big lift. We're starting training on this this summer, but this kind of work will be, we think, really transformative and helpful in terms of our relationships and supportive, we hope, to staff and to students and parents.
I have another question. So it says the 2 positions are budget, 2 of the AP for special services positions will be budget neutral. Is that because the folks who were already supervisors will be transitioning into that role?
No, so we had a number of classrooms that were significantly smaller, so I did an analysis of class sizes across the district, and we consolidated some classrooms where we saw significant lower numbers.
Okay, so that freed up funds to support. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to go, so we'll still have this special education supervisors. We're not changing the number of those. We're just adding these assistant principals for special services.
And we're deploying the supervisors to be site-based, as opposed to roaming between sites and sites.
So there will be one special ed supervisor for each site?
Who'll
Okay.
be in charge of each site? Isn't that the way it is today?
You have one assigned to each site, and they still have to.
So not in every single site. So I mean, so in, let's say, we'll have, for sites that have this new role, so for example, let's say Kingsley, the person would be, the special ed supervisor would be allocated there for 4 days, and then they may have 1 day at a site that
Already has an
already
assistant principal.
already has an assistant principal.
Who's not special ed?
That's how the special ed supervisors will be allocated.
Correct.
So they'll still travel multiple sites.
They will go to a second site, not 3. Sometimes we have special ed supervisors who are 3. So they would have 4 days at one site, and then 1 day at a site that they've had in the past, or that doesn't have a assistant principal or those special
Wait, so
services.
if it doesn't have an assistant principal, or that does?
That does have an assistant principal. So
Okay.
on the 1 day where they're traveling to, that would
That
be a
will
site
be
that already has an assistant principal. And on the 4 days, they would be at a site that does not have an assistant
Okay.
principal, and they would be playing the role of the special ed supervisor as well as the assistant principal in that building.
And these 3 new positions, the assistant principals for special services, which are administrative positions. So those special ed, okay, so the AP, 3 AP positions, those will only be deployed at schools that don't currently have an AP.
All 3,
Yeah, they will divide
Oh,
their time amongst
that's
the
correct.
schools that do not currently have assistant principals.
that's correct.
The
And
school that has an assistant principal will not get.
that's right. And we also have on our model, there is concern that because Shoot has been as large, has only had 1 assistant principal, versus all the other middle schools have had 2 assistant principals, and they've had significant issues over the years. And so in our model, it allows also for adding additional support there out of the 3 assistant principals, correct?
But at the elementary schools, it will only be at the.
That's right.
I think, again, this is not necessarily a conversation for today, but I do think it would be useful for us to take another look. To my knowledge, in the board, we haven't discussed what the guidelines are for when a school has an assistant principal, since we first kind of rolled that out, 6 years ago. And I think it would be useful to revisit that discussion of which, my recollection is it was largely driven by size. And I just think that it would be worthwhile to revisit what schools get assistant principals and how the REIA would impact the decision of which school would get an assistant principal. I would be interested, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, Meg, to hear your thoughts on these positions and what you've just heard.
So this is really the first time I'm hearing about this new model. It sounds like a great idea to try to support students, families, and educators. I think my wondering is how many special service supervisors are there now? It sounds like if there's 3 people, that would be supporting 6 buildings. Kathy knows I'm a visual, so I guess I need to see it a little bit better to understand more. And are all these, do they all have type 75s? I mean, are they, I think, because I'm not, this is the first time I'm hearing of this. So I think it sounds like a great way of trying to shift some. I think I worry about some of the schools, even with APs, though, that have large special ed populations. I guess I'm wondering how that's going to look like now if they only have a special ed supervisor there for that 1 day a week. How, you know.
They've never had anybody there more than 1 day a week.
And I know that sometimes that scheduling meetings
Right,
especially
the
have
problem.
been challenging, especially for some of our
Right.
buildings that have a large population of special ed programs or students that we serve. So I guess I'm wondering now if they're only going to be if their time is going to be even more limited, what that flexibility is going to do for those buildings who already are serving. So I think it would have been nice to hear a little bit more about it to see what that would actually look like. But hearing that there's going to be some redeployment to be able to support families and students and educators sounds like a great idea, especially with looking and being able to roll out our discipline policy. I guess and wonder what training are they getting that would be different from other educators, and then are the other assistant principals, is this, I have lots of questions, actually.
Well, so they will be trained in terms of being a supervisor, as well as in some of the, for those who are new to this, in some of the AP roles, as well as in the restorative practices retreat that we're having, August 8th and 9th, where we have, that's part of our PD plan in terms of training co-leads in every building for restorative work. For schools that have more special education students, for instance, Chute, King Arts, Haven, they are getting a substantial amount of supervisor time at those buildings.
We've also talked about the current APs having some level of training along with the new restorative practice special services APs. And then the second piece, which both your questions are hitting, and I appreciate coming back on what the criteria are for APs writ large. I think we're also trying to address need, and that need has, so student population, yes, but need has grown so that even in some of our smaller schools, so take Kingsley, and we've heard loud and clear from the educators, the leaders, and parents, very deeply at Kingsley and at Dawes especially, the need for very attentive service to help address some of these things. So that was at the heart of, and the intent of building out these positions.
I would add programmatic. So we looked at number of programs in the school additionally. We looked at the types of the demographics of the student population. We identified also other programs. So for example, we would put Title I versus language programs versus self-contained special ed, cross-gap room, number of prior APs. So those were all factors in number of sections in a class, in a grade level. These were factors that went into the consideration, which is why we landed at this model. The audit was also another factor, as I mentioned. Also, the types of disciplinary challenges that come up in the school. And then the last thing I would add is that it was really important for us to, as we went through the identifying how to lift this, was to make sure that we weren't going to, like you said, if there are places where an assistant principal is, more of a luxury, we wanted to pay attention to those things as well. What I would say that regardless in this district, the size of the building, the student population is a factor, so I did mention that, but that was a factor. However, a school of 403 versus 450 or 500, those are the amount of time that a principal has to engage, both in terms of attending to the staff needs, community needs, and partnerships and district partnerships, I wouldn't say are significantly different. Your hours, if you're really in there and engaged and really leading the work, it's upwards of 60 hours, 70 hours. It can be that far because you're spending you're having to balance a lot of events, and you're the only person. So if you're the only principal in that building, you're going to be at multiple things if you're doing your job well. So, and I would say that that's an important consideration.
For sure, and I'm not suggesting that.
I didn't-
shouldn't
I'm
be
just saying
considered.
offering
I just think
ideas.
that it's worth revisiting
Of course,
what the criteria are and why schools have assistant principals to make sure that we are deploying that resource as effectively and as equitably as possible.
I was only offering that as you asked about criteria that was considered.
Right.
I totally agree.
No,
I'd be
I
happy to
understand.
bring it to the
Yeah.
board and review in depth what the criteria was. I was just offering that when we were looking at this, it wasn't more like parts are like, who wants an AP? Hey,
Oh,
pick
of
an
course
AP.
not. No,
But more just we
it's a
had
question that has
criteria.
come from the community
Of
about why
course,
certain
yeah.
schools get it and why they don't.
Yeah.
So I
I'd
think
be
it's
happy
worth
to.
having that public, transparent conversation. This is how it was been decided, and so people understand. And this is how
Yeah.
these new assistant principal positions are going to be used. And I would also say, I think I'm a little bit disappointed that this is the first time that Meg is hearing about this. I think that it's having educators understand these positions and how they're going to be deployed and how they can access the supports is going to be very important. So, and that the
This is
buildings
not
are
the
getting.
first time she's heard about this. We've had a conversation, maybe in terms of this specifically, but in terms of closing, we sat down and talked about, we were redeploying, we were planning to add assistant principals to our buildings. Now, in terms of the hybrid model, maybe that's new, but in terms of notifying her, that was absolutely a priority to discuss that we were going to close classrooms because we wanted to live assistant principals. So that was a priority, and we did communicate with her. Now, to get to the model of a hybrid model, that was some creative thinking. That was kind of like, okay, how do we make this work? But we did speak with Meg about that.
And just
Yeah,
make
I'd
sure
like
that we
to-
have a greater conversation too, or to make sure that everyone is, aware and understands how these resources are going to be used.
So I just wanted to chime in that I have specifically said that if there is something that we need, we should get a proposal so that we can discuss it as a board. And I feel like this is an opportunity to talk about that, which I appreciate. I feel like it being kind of slipped in here maybe doesn't elevate the conversation. It doesn't allow for the details that we need. So, I mean, we're asking some of those questions, but I think that perhaps this discussion needed to be pulled out and elevated and maybe as a discussion item. I think it needs to be elevated to a discussion item. That would allow us to have a conversation about, are we changing our parameters for allocation of APs? Just so we could hear a little bit more about the gaps that this is intended to fill. We've certainly heard about gaps. We've heard about trauma needs. We've heard about crises that need support. We've certainly heard from our community about frustrations around special services. So I think that it's wonderful that we're getting presented a potential solution. I just also feel like we needed maybe a broader, a deeper presentation about what gaps this was filling, and how stakeholders were being engaged in the discussion, what the ultimate fiscal plan is for it as well, and long-term, what is the sustainability or lack thereof of the model that's being proposed. I think that's all information that we probably need to discuss, and we're kind of pulling it out here of this finance presentation.
We can do that. The intent wasn't to slip something by. The intent here is to actually focus on the needs that have been raised. And then I agree that how we communicate and how we actually explicate how this works is something that we can add to. But we have been working on this for a while. We've also been at the bargaining table for the last 6 months. We also have a lot of deliverables that we're delivering, and we're at the end of the school year. And so part of what we have is a regular process to introduce new positions, which we are doing, and we can easily come back with some more specifics that actually meet community needs, because I think this is an innovative way of actually applying our limited budget, because we also put a limit on this. We didn't say we're going to create another 10 or 15 or 20 positions. So how do we deploy the right services at the right places? And that's the intent here. But we can easily unpack that.
Thank you.
So Paul and I had talked at some point in time about the fact that we have 5 special ed supervisors. So what I was trying to do was to develop a plan to get those people into the buildings, but it takes time. One of them is bilingual. I need to keep that person committed to bilingual work, so she will have 3 schools next year because that has to happen. So this is a transition and the right way to really service all students within the buildings, and I was hoping that it will financially meet the need of having more AP support within our buildings, as well as supporting special needs and lifting the restorative practices.
Are assistant principals for special services and restorative practices the same as special ed supervisors?
Yes.
I think
So-
that's the
morphing
confusion.
into now.
Is that something that will special ed supervisor titles change or vice versa so that they're aligned at some point? Okay.
We
Is-
wanted our cake and wanted to eat it too, because we wanted to respond to many of the community members who said we wanted an assistant
Yeah,
principal.
no, I'm,
And we're trying to meet needs, and maybe we did too much.
No,
I get it.
I'm just confused. I
get
I'm
it.
just, I don't get it. I mean, I get the need and I get what you're trying to, I just don't get the people and the numbers. So we have 5 supervisors today,
but we're gonna have 8.
or we're gonna have 8 people going forward, and everybody's gonna be an AP, or 3 of those people will be called APs.
Their functions are the same, but their titles are different, is what I'm hearing.
It's all going to morph at some point, but it's not going to be the same right now that it is down the road. It will, I think our goal is to have a special educator, administrator in every building, but today that's not the case. We have a number of APs who are gen ed. So this will take time, but we've figured this out where the numbers are going to address the openings that we have.
So I think we need a image of what that looks like, right? Like, so
Okay,
what's
I can bring that to you
being
next week.
okay. What's being described ostensibly sounds great. How it's actually going to be executed and like in the performative, what is it going to look like is not clear. I mean, and how do we find 3 people who have AP skills, special services, and restorative practices capacity?
So that's why I started by saying we are landing here because we had a pilot of this year, essentially, for lack of a better word, but we lifted this year. For example, Mike Edwards provided a full day of additional assistant principal-like support in a building where he supported the culture and climate, he assisted with discipline, he engaged with parents, he was maybe have done informal classroom support with teachers, and he served as the special ed supervisor for that building. So we are essentially expanding this model where he can be now an administrator, where now he would be, this year, those individuals were not doing special ed evaluations in the building, so they were not responsible for evaluating. So in using to ask you to paint the picture, Mike Edwards' example, we're adding now 3 days to Mike's schedule to be at Walker School, for example. He's not signed it. I'm just saying, for example, he would now be there an additional 3 days to the 1 day he's already there. And then 1 day he may go over to Shoot and continue to provide special ed support, or he would go to Dawes, or not Dawes because that didn't have one, but he would go over to Lincoln School where he's been supportive there, and he would have an extra day. So he would serve as the administrator for special services and students. So he'd essentially be extending the administrative support to Ms. Lumpkin to be able to provide that. And so this year he provided MTSS support. He served in a variety of committees, before school, after school, working with the union, with the teachers union in the building, helping, essentially working collaboratively with the principal in that role. Partially I came, when I was a principal at Dewey School, I worked very closely with Michelle Brand, and we had a lot of these conversations, but she was there one day a week. Michelle is an overachiever and really would extend herself, right? So she assisted, every year we would build our special ed schedule around students with special needs, so she was at the heart of my scheduling committee. So if I imagine that she was an assistant principal in the building, she had 3 days or 4 days there, it would extend that. And the addition of her ability to evaluate special ed staff strengthens her role as a special ed supervisor for that building. Because right now, she would have to work through me to essentially give feedback. Now, of course, she can give informal feedback to a person all the time, but by raising her profile, let's say at Dewey as a principal there, it would allow for there to be a deeper engagement across the building around the supporting our students with special needs, and helping me as a principal have somebody who I'm working collaboratively with.
Thank you. Would that evaluation extend to gen ed instructors?
So in the model, we don't want to exclude, because there may be a year in our current model for evaluation, there are years where you have teachers may be on an on year or an off year. So I would say that because they have a 75, I don't know if I would make it so that it's exclusive. I think that's the priority, because there may be a year where if you're assigned to a building and there are 5 special education staff and you're only evaluating those 5 and then the principal is carrying 25, that doesn't seem very equitable in that case. So to say that it would be exclusive is not accurate, I would say.
I see. Okay. And I just also wanted to point out that there seemed like there may be a little defensiveness about the amount of questions that are being posed. And if this was pulled out as a discussion item, and if this has been a pilot and it's been a discussion for a year, and we had gotten this information earlier and differently, perhaps the level of questioning would feel different.
Absolutely.
That's fair.
I just want to
Thank you
add,
for your
I know Meg's got a couple questions too. As you're talking about this, I know too much. I would like, as you're moving down this road, I hope that you will free yourself of the mindset that the special educator on the admin team has to be the assistant principal. But if you're looking at 2 administrators in a building, there's a team of skills that you're looking for that have Black student success, special education knowledge and skills, general education management evaluations, and that team just has to have everything combined. And that doesn't always mean that the person with the special education skills has to be the assistant. Just know that there's a lot of great ones that would make great principals too, and the assistant principal can be the other side of that. So for what that's worth.
My first question is, had you thought at all, because I like the creativity of thinking about how to respond to the needs. JH wasn't mentioned, and I know that their population is solely students at risk, and so I guess I had wondered where in the conversation or discussion had you thought about JH at all? That was my first question, so it's more of a thought for later. But I do think that I've heard a lot of need from JH, especially, I think, Anya, you made me think about it with children coming with trauma. I've heard a lot from them this year. So I think that's another, as you think through the model, I would encourage you to think about how maybe you would also be able to provide some more support to JH. The second question, I don't know who to ask it to, was about the 131 increase in students. I guess what I'm seeing up there is 4, and I'm guessing that some of the class size reduction would be able to meet. The closing of classrooms seems to me it might fill some of the meeting of the 131. That would be an increase, but I'm just wondering how are we also meeting the needs of the not meeting the needs, but how are we going to, there's 131 new students. Where is that in the thinking, or was it just with the collapsing of classrooms? So I think that's.
Those are separate. So the closing of the classrooms are not in the schools where you have 131. The increased enrollment are not connected to those.
Okay.
So the increased enrollment is across the district, and then we don't know where they will necessarily land in terms of their.
I get that, but for me, there's 131 new students, so I guess I was trying to think about where maybe there might need to be some additional staffing. Typically, when we have had an increase in population across our district of that number, there has been an increase in staffing. I was under the assumption that the closing of classrooms would then equate to that. I wasn't aware that it would, so, whatever. I'm just trying to think of how are we also then thinking about how are we going to meet 131, depending upon where that goes, where is that fitting in with this thinking?
You're right. So
Not be an answer for right now, it's just a noticing and a wondering.
So you're absolutely right. Some of the staffing, some of the additional positions are due to the increases. We also have retirement. Part of the delay, and you're absolutely right, I apologize for not bringing this earlier, but a lot of this was not even, I'll be honest, I wasn't sure how we could even do this up until about 2 weeks ago because there were a lot of factors involved, from closing to, so even figuring out the time to get on the agenda prior to this evening, this was not even a possibility up until really, so we had the retirements, that was a huge factor, and then from there, identifying what classrooms, what are the possibilities, and then working with Meg, we worked on what were the possibilities around potential closings, having to vet that through our staffing while working with staff who were engaged. And so just wanted not to excuse the delay or not bringing a presentation earlier, but these were the factors that was a domino effect about being able to get through to where we are here today because of the challenges around. So the vision was there, but then also not to overpromise or forecast something that couldn't really even be a possibility unless these other factors were really clear, because then that's unfair. And I didn't want to create a scenario. It's like we're promising something that's going to come and then it doesn't deliver in terms of expectations. And so really wanting to make sure that in terms of the procedural elements internally, those were clear. So I would say that I would be happy to come back to the board with even more clarity if there's some additional things that need to be brought forward. But I think that the addition of the staffing positions, I don't have the count with me, but we had to, the combination of retirement, people attrition, as well as at certain schools increased significant enrollment, but yet added up to some of the additional teacher positions. So it's a good point. And then none of the teachers whose classrooms were closed were lost to the district, but they did fit into the model of who was retiring versus who was not, and which is why we ended with the number we had.
And on the JH question, I think I'm right that Sharon has actually hired an additional person, which we allowed, using resources that she had in a role. Help me with the role, because it's not.
Is it a director role?
Is it an assistant director role or?
An assistant director to,
teaching and learning or something.
what's the title? Stacey?
Beatrice should have the exact title.
It's an assistant to the director of early childhood programming who will help with a variety of things, including instruction, coaching, evaluation. I don't know if I want to use the word discipline in early childhood, but working with students to support their needs. Yes, and so that is something that through the grants, she was able to identify this funding source, and it will be effective for the upcoming school year.
Can I ask what funding source
So it was money that was found within the grant, and I don't know,
Oh, there's
it's within the Head Start grant.
PFA, there's, Head Start.
I think it was the Head Start grant.
And there was also a conversion of dollars from a coaching position to this position, so. Yeah, there was-
When we talked to her in budget, we made it clear that she could not get more money. So she had to look in the budget, and there was a position that was budgeted for and funded in the grant, EC grant, I believe. And we wanted her to look at, if she wanted a new position, how could she repurpose what she already has without being a net gain of position? And she was able to do that. I still felt like she could provide the services required by the grants and that the children require here in this building.
I see. Wasn't there already assistant director position? Or is there?
Jessie Block serves as a role, she's an assistant, but not an assistant director, and so it's a slightly different title. So she helps with a number of different functions, but this was money that we had in a coaching position and that we hadn't utilized, and so we did some switching, Stacy and Sharon and I
think to be
Katrina,
clear, too, this
we all
position
talked.
is very connected to teaching and learning, direct teaching and learning support. And so we'll be working with teachers in classrooms, we'll be providing instructional support, we'll be doing some of the evaluation work, and we'll be involved in the restorative practices. So the identified need here was really to get more in-classroom support for educators and support for the professional learning planning. There's the intersection of multiple grants and multiple programs leaves a really heavy administrative lift on that program. And so this was a way that resources were really, a very large percentage of the administrative resources were going into grant management and administration, and this is a way to create a position that is much stronger, much more aligned to teaching and learning and educator support.
I see. And so, and I recall the Head Start grant, one of the, I think, areas for growth was instruction. And so are these,
This individual will be working to support instruction in the center.
so Head Start will get support from?
Yes, right. The position is set up to work across both of those programs.
Both programs, not just Head Start
That is
and
correct.
preschool for all?
You know what, so then I appreciate, again, the investment in that position, but I know there's, the State Board of Education offers a directory for early childhood mental health consultants. So speaking to what our DEC colleagues are concerned about in regards to children, having a lot of trauma issues, being at risk, and that's, we primarily support through our early childhood programs. I think this is a question that we can take back to Sharon, but maybe looking at the early childhood block grant, PFA, PI, to look for early childhood mental health consultants who actually work with staff in helping address mental health issues and even help teachers with their own issues that they may be having. So, I mean, it's an incredible model that I know the state's been trying to push across early childhood programs across the state, so something I don't know if we've considered that.
Yeah, I think that we have used a consultant in, I know we have one in the Family Center, and I believe we have one that we use in 3 to 5. But I think that's a good point, and maybe we can discuss that some more.
And we can definitely discuss it. The team is very good about looking into and pursuing relevant grants, but we can definitely take a look at that.
That's great.
All right. That was our last item. So our next meeting is August 12th, 2019, of the Finance Committee.
Joe, can I ask one question?
Sure.
I noticed that there was a lot of late fees with the buses the last 2 months, and I'm just curious, what is going on? I mean, it was like a very different number than,
I can speak to that. There's actually been a war going on, if I can use that analogy.
okay?
With Positive Connection. They've, over the last 2 months, they've kind of fallen down on their responsibilities. And we've taken them to task.
Good.
And what we've also done is we actually had the district attorney write them a letter informing them that we intend to break out of our contract unless we see some specific performance improvement. And once they got that letter, they got serious. They realized that it was serious. And we even took it a step further. We actually had a bid. We did an RFP which we communicated to them that we're going to break their routes in half. We're going to bid out half of their route to a second provider. Once they found that out, they knew we were serious there, that it wasn't just idle talk. So they've stepped up their game the last 3 weeks or so, but I'm still not convinced. I told them that we still intend to go forward and try to find alternative to the service they provide. But in all honesty, there's a limit to what we can do.
Sure.
The bid that we got, it was substantially higher.
Of course.
I mean, it's all with public information. It was substantially higher. But what we intend to do, we intend to keep pursuing all opportunities that we have to remedy the situation that we find ourselves in. So we recognize it's a problem.
I just was noticing, it just stood out.
Yeah,
So
we recognize the problem. We've been playing hardball to make sure that they perform as required by the terms of their contract. And so and they seem to be doing better since we've had those meetings. And we intend to continue to see what we can do. If they don't straighten up, to find another provider who will be.
Maybe Zoom can help.
Actually, we appreciate your feistiness on behalf of children. And if those of you in TV land, if you would like to substitute, contact the HR office, TSS, and get you up. So we'll adjourn the Finance Committee meeting at 9:45.
All right, and with that, we will move on to our working board meeting. I'm assuming we don't have any. Right, we spoke, and our Foundation 65 representatives left, so.
I talked to our Foundation 65 colleagues. The educators who were here were planning for the last day of school, and so I said that by the time we landed here, it might be better to come back another time. I invited them for next week, but they actually said they would prefer to come back en masse in August or early September, where we can really celebrate the educators who have been honored by the grants. So we will work that through.
Thank you. So then we will just go on to the consolidated title plan.
Yes, we can.
Stacy, take over.
Absolutely. So State of Illinois made some shifts to essentially the grant applications this year and moved to a consolidated application. And so what you see in the board packet is essentially kind of a state bureaucratic shift to a consolidated application for our title funds, our IDA funds, Title III, the full category. So what we did is, with the support of Kim Kelly and Joyce Bartz, we essentially took the grant applications and worked through the consolidated application. And so what you have presented within the packet tonight is the consolidated application that we would submit to the state of Illinois, which would allow us to move forward with the more detailed, essentially planning and budgeting for the individual grants. And my understanding is it's the state's intention to really support increased dialogue across departments around the grant funds.
All right, nice. Are there any questions?
I have to tell you that I read the whole thing.
Wow, you're tough.
I did.
And that little tiny print, I was trying to, and I just.
And I had a question around, it's really more global question around PD, and I'm not going to direct you to a page in the
Okay.
But in how do you balance the fundamental writing of the grant, which has certain language, with the actualization of getting to the goal of student achievement?
So I really think actually under ESSA, it's a little bit easier than it probably has been in the past, because ESSA really focuses on growth as opposed to absolute attainment, and has allowed flexibility to open up the use of the dollars from math literacy to social emotional learning, mental health. And so there is a broader umbrella that you can use. And so what we really did when we moved from targeted assistance to school-wide funding last year with Title I was through the needs assessment, we heard our schools saying, we really want to have that increased flexibility to be thinking about school needs in that broader umbrella, including social emotional learning and mental health. And so when we put the consolidated application together, the fact that that avenue has been opened up, it allowed IDEA to fold in a much tighter way as well.
Were the last year's school title grants, including?
So Title I, we moved to school-wide this year.
Right,
And
so the ones that we saw in the fall?
Exactly.
Were the new ones?
Yes, that was written under the new ESSA guidelines, and this is as well. And so in some ways you see alignment between that shift and this, and there's some of the language is actually from that exact documentation. And so the fact that it does allow the broader umbrella allows us to stay true. One of the ways we're looking at next year, we want to go deeply into strengthening restorative practices. That fits well underneath that umbrella. We know we want to dig into cognitive rigor in our classrooms, and that can reach across literacy and numeracy. So I think the increased umbrella of flexibility allows us to be able to think more systematically across the district and across our grants.
All right, excellent. Sergi, I went out of order. Can you read the motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the consolidated title plan required for the ISB funding application.
Second.
Yes.
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 Yes. Now we'll move on to our discussion item, the 2019-2020 Student Assessment Plan. Stacy, again, want to go ahead?
Okay. And I'll just give kind of a brief summary of the memo. The memo really tried to capture the fact that we are working to improve the overall assessment tools and assessment experience and impact for our teachers and our students, and that this has been a collaborative effort with board colleagues, with DEC colleagues, and with district administration. Our longer term goal is that we are looking for an assessment framework that's integrated, systematic, and can determine the nature and the extent of student learning and social emotional development and the effectiveness of learning experiences that lead to those outcomes. So that individual student piece as well as our course and program assessment. Through this work, I think a couple things to pull out importantly. This is an update. We included the pilots in here as well. This is, I think, a very strong virtually final draft, but does say in the memo the assessment of information is still in process and may still have some minor revisions before we finalize, because we've been working hard on this to the finish line. The group really did arrive on a basic understanding that we're looking at assessment at 3 different layers. We want to measure students to our standards, which tends to be an external standardized assessment for us. We want to use our curricular assessments in order to inform day in, day out Tier 1 instruction. And then we need to have diagnostic and progress monitoring tools to support our formative work and our interventions. We really, one of the primary things that we wanted to do in this work was to decrease the amount of assessment time. And there are some pretty significant shifts in the work that we were able to come to agree on. One important piece is for any student that has a score from this spring that returns to District 65 in the fall on MAP, they will not take the fall MAP assessment. We will use the spring assessment data. Educators in the younger grades, and actually throughout, will be provided a conferring protocol. So there's a tool that educators can opt to use if they want to get into a conversation and kind of a opportunity to assess that student's reading ability to determine, do I feel like this data that I'm getting from the spring is still valid? And if not, they have the option to do assessment, but they are not required to do assessment. And that applies for MAP and either DRA or STEP, depending on the one-to-one literacy assessment they have. We also removed one of the MAP administrations in both 2nd and 3rd grade for 2 very different reasons. In 2nd grade, the MAP 2.5 growth assessment is the better math assessment due to mathematical content. However, early in 1st grade, without the audio assist, it can be a challenging test for some students who are still really working on their early literacy skills. And so we decided to lean on our EM4, our curricular beginning of year assessment there, and to go to the 2.5 in the winter. in order to allow some time for students to be strengthening those literacy abilities and just be kind of strengthening their readiness for that assessment. Additionally, we have agreed that we will define a DRA and STEP benchmark with that kind of at that level, and below we would turn on audio assist for students so they have the opportunity to have that assessment read to them, because we do want to have a true understanding of their mathematical abilities and limit the amount possible that their current reading abilities are influencing that. The group also identified third grade as a challenging spot because students are still taking one-to-one literacy assessments, and they are then also taking math assessments, and it's the first year they run into the Illinois Assessment of Readiness. And so in the fall, those students don't take the math map because they have a spring score. In the winter, the team decided to pull the reading assessment because we still have one-to-one data, and this reality of the fact that now we have a winter score, a fall score we can work with, and we have the Illinois Assessment of Readiness coming. And so really that was a decision based on the fact that we could lean on another assessment measure to gather literacy information, and out of consideration for the amount of time that these kids that are still pretty young are spending navigating standardized computer tests. And again, that option can be there for educators, but we're not going to require it. A couple other quick adjustments we've made. We've really reclarified ISIL is kindergarten only. It is there for diagnostic as they wish. In collaboration with some educators around kids as well, they've raised a question about whether one of the particular screeners, the story listening, is still necessary or relevant. So we're going to take a quick look at that. And that's something that is subject to evaluation and may still be removed from the calendar. And then in K3, we got into an interesting conversation around our curricular end-of-year assessment for EM4. And one of the things we discovered is it's the end-of-year assessment in the way things happen is landing, quite frankly, after we close the report card window. And so therefore is not lending a lot of really important and good information for us. And in the everyday math curriculum, the 9th unit, with the exception of second grade, does not have a lot of new content. Second grade is unique in the sense that it's quite a bit of new content. So as a result, we've decided to lean on the Unit 8 cumulative assessment, which is a nice roll-up, provides good information for report cards, and would not have any reporting requirements around that EOY assessment at the end of the year. And then the last piece, and the final bullet on the shifts, is intended to be only about kindergarten. In kindergarten, we're going to remove the District 65 beginning of year math assessment and essentially replace it with activity cards that can be used by kindergarten educators to support observation around kids' competencies. And there's kind of a nice alignment that we can pull there and give educators some supports for things that activities in the classrooms for observation. Other just quick things on pilots and other general assessment updates. We are giving kids this coming year. We have trained at this point over 50 educators. Our final training is this coming Thursday, and at that point we'll have trained over 70 educators for administering the kids' assessment, and that includes our general education kindergarten teachers, our ESL teachers, and special education teachers who work with kindergarten classrooms. We also have worked and met with a small group of educators that went to the networking day in Elgin with us, and we've pulled together twice since then to debrief that experience and talk about what are some specific District 65 things that we want to be considering within implementation. That group's going to continue talking next year. We consulted about the number of measures and how we wanted to lift the first year, and we're all in agreement that requirement for first year would be one assessment fall for 14 measures, but there are some educators who are potentially interested in piloting it throughout the year, and there are educators that are interested in engaging with us throughout the year to talk about potential report card shifts as well as conversations about ways in which we can increase opportunities for essentially opportunities for purposeful play that elevate student choice making, student decision making, and problem solving. And we need to do that, and we've all come to an agreement we need to do that while juggling what we see as being really critical learning needs and understandings for our kindergarten kids. And so it's balancing the needs of both of those things. And so we've agreed to keep working through some of those things collaboratively in this next school year to figure out how to best navigate the kindergarten space. Pilots, the STEP pilot, we piloted STEP at 3 schools this year, Washington, Lincoln, and Bessie Rhodes. In the memo, I explained that there is a lot that we've learned. Some of what we've learned are the things that we didn't do right. And we have worked through a standing committee in CAC to ask for a second year on this pilot. There still is resistance or a desire to not continue the pilot at 2 of our schools, but there are voices from educators in those schools also saying, yes, we think this is worth a second year. We've made significant modifications to the pilot. 1, we've increased support, and 2, we've modified some of the conditions of assessment, including capping the number of step levels that you would go above grade level to address some of the concerns, including assessment time. And so our desire is that we have found, that between the listening and the modifying, that we've come to a place where we think that we can really have a successful pilot next year, but we've also made the commitment to, we have 3 areas of assessment, and if this does not prove to be the tool that we hope it to be around providing really strong standards-aligned diagnostic information to inform instruction and accelerate learning for students of color, then we will move on to piloting a different one-to-one assessment, because ultimately at a point we need to move to a Common Core aligned, standards aligned one-to-one literacy assessment, of which DRA is currently not. So, and then Las Links is a language assessment, essentially a Spanish literacy assessment that through collaborative work with our Spanish for Spanish speakers, educators in the middle school, we are going to pilot next year in order to find a way to continue to monitor the growth of Spanish language literacy through the middle school. And Las Links is also one of the assessments that is linked to the biliteracy certification, and so it's a nice strand for kind of continuity and growth to see that if we're keeping our students on track towards that certification. And then the last piece is social emotional learning. We did pilot CellWeb this year in order to determine, to really see if it could be an appropriate instrument to inform our SEAL curriculum. There were, as described in the memo, some administration challenges in our K-1 space. It became timely, the logins are challenging, those things we found ultimately through our social workers in the group that it didn't turn out to be the assessment and the experience we were hoping for. You should not create too many social emotional challenges with your social emotional learning assessment. So we have backed off on that, and we are doing a couple things. We'll meet with some of the social workers that work in that course to see if there's something else that we might want to pilot next year. But then more broadly, we want to do over the next year is really kind of lean on the cell measures report that I included, referenced in the memo, choosing and using cell competency assessments to really dig into what is the social emotional learning framework that we want to draw back to, what are the goals in which we want, what would be the role of a social emotional learning assessment in our district, what are the competencies we're looking to assess, and then review assessment options to do a broader and more comprehensive pilot the following year. And I think really as we dug into this, 1, this is an emerging field. 2, we really need to think about the cultural sensitivities and the cultural understandings of the instruments. And 3, we really need to think about any move we make more broadly on a social emotional learning assessment. We need to be really clear about our goal and our use so that it is used to elevate student strengths and to connect and accelerate our learning, and not as something that labels students and potentially limits opportunity. So we want to use the year to execute essentially the first 4 steps outlined in that report so that we would be in a position to do kind of an informed, structured pilot. I think looking at 2 of our pilots this year, both CellWeb and STEP, we discovered in both that we needed more professional learning and more upfront support, and we want to make sure that when we make the move on something potentially around social emotional learning assessment, that we're in a position to do that well.
Let me just say that this is a very comprehensive report, so I appreciate pulling it together. I want to thank Suni and Anya and Meg and her team of colleagues. Lisa Harries has been involved, and several other colleagues, and Stacy and Donna Cross, Andalip and I have been working on this very intensively over the last couple months. And typically we don't get to really thinking about our assessments till tomorrow or Wednesday when school is out. And so I just want to honor the fact that this is an important step, and yet there's a lot more work to do. And we'll continue to do it. We'll do it over the summer. We'll do it into the fall. So thank all who've been involved.
We're at the starting line.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I mean, I think this was a really great moment where there was some joint board, educator and administrator work. And I do think, I need to say thanks to Stacy for listening to the educator's voice around wanting to protect students' instruction and also their social emotional experience with school and not having it just be around testing, but also honoring that we do have to have a way to measure students' growth and achievement. And so trying to find the balance between both, but I think that what I do think that, Stacy presented tonight really did hear teachers' feedback and honor that on behalf of the students that they serve. So thank you for that. And thanks for everybody for teaming together to make that happen. And yes, there's always room for growth.
Thank you, Meg.
Thanks, Meg.
I would just also echo that this memo really represents months of intensive work, and I think you captured it so well, too, of everything we discussed and the conclusions that we came up to. So thank you to you and Donna for all of that work, and Meg, and to all of the deck leaders who participated in the discussion, and Anya and I were there along the way. So I think this is a tremendous start, so thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo. I wanted to highlight what Meg said, which is I really feel like this is a representation of doing collaborative work that really does put children and families at the center. Not that you don't recognize this, but for folks who are listening, this conversation started with us talking about the amount of time that children were spending being assessed and how that impacted children, and then that extended to how does that impact educators who are in relationship with children while also feeling required to do this level of assessment. That then was elevated to the conversation, well, how do we get the information that we need in order to have confidence, right, that children are going to be able to get what they need to meet the standards. So what I think this is an excellent capture of the conversation and the months of work and the many, many different perspectives that were shared. But I also just want to highlight that it's the representational of collaborative work centered around concern for children's experience in the classroom. So thank you.
And just to add on one more piece, because this came from mostly our DEC colleagues, but all of us, that if we could figure out a way to switch some of our assessment schedules so that the opening of the year is focused on relationships and on grounding in the classroom and on the joy of being in the classroom, which I think all the voices had. If we could figure that out and still meet the criteria around judging to standards, having diagnostic assessments, and having some sense of how we're doing on our curriculum, then it's a better day. And we've found some light at the end of that tunnel at this stage of this, and we'll continue to do that.
Any questions, comments?
Thank you. I specifically appreciate the thought, and I know I expressed it in email. Triple thank you for thinking about our English learners who, again, in my experience as an educator, get slammed around March and April with access, with having to do MAP and then having to do IAR. So, I really appreciate that. And then just, wondering if there's, since you're saying we're in the starting line, it's, making sure that we also think about our special education populations. And I know, again, their testing accommodations are dependent on their IEPs, but, whatever we can do to make sure that we are ensuring that those accommodations are being met so they can be successful in these assessments, I would really appreciate. A couple of other things too. For me, as being now that we're in the 21st century, again, I think assessments can move and be expanded in a way that measure skills that are relevant to the 21st century. And I'm glad that the new education law ESSA really focuses on not just proficiency but growth, growth to proficiency, and expands and gives us flexibility as school districts and educators to expand that piece to include social emotional, to include arts. And just to let you know, and the folks at home know that again, I know the State Board of Ed is working on and taking public comments around assessment practices, particularly for English learners. And they're also talking about, creating measures for fine arts, which again will be coming down the road, and I think it's something that we definitely should consider as we again expand the way we measure the complexity that children and the knowledge that they gain from our schools, how we can capture that in a more comprehensive way. Let's see if I got any other questions. As we think about kids, I know one of the things I didn't see in the memo, but this has been common practice. Just wanted to make sure that we're explicit about it, is that I know the MAP offers a Spanish option for English learners, and I know that's something that we administer in our English learner TWEET classes, so that's great. I also, again, just heard that they developed a Spanish assessment, and kids also has a Spanish competency, so hoping that we consider that for our TWEET kindergarten classrooms as we do the assessment.
So the kids' Spanish ELA was covered in the training and will be part of what we pick up. MAP, essentially the reading growth that now should be available in Spanish in this coming year. We did schedule a demo. It was not working at that time, so we need to get it back because we wanted to really take a look at the Spanish literacy itself. Our bilingual team was on that, and so we'll be looking at that and figuring out the right uses there. And I think just, so yes, we have those considerations, and I've got your email. We'll pay attention to that. I do feel like, first, just two things from me. It was the full collaboration of the board, the DEC colleagues, and, we went through, we definitely not all the conversations were easy conversations, but we were able to get there, and so it really was the fact that people stayed at the table and really dug into the conversation, and we were able to get, I think, to a stronger place. But I do also fundamentally believe that we are at a starting line now, because there is work that needs to get done in the summer to lift this well. And then we also have had a couple of conversations with educators too about now how can we improve what we do with the information, both with our educator colleagues and in our communication with families.
And I actually did want to highlight that too, that the focus on that piece of it, and particularly in response to some of the concerns that we raised or that we had seen raised in the community about the mid-year assessment data, and shifting that window earlier so that the January half-day can be used by educators for data review. Correct. And, digging into that to learn, to understand what they need to shift to better support students. I think that's a really big and important thing to highlight. So thank you for recognizing that and also including that in the plan.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask too, there's the racial equity impact assessment tool questions that you answered, which I appreciate. And it mentions more engagement with parent stakeholders. And what plan, if any, is there in place to have those conversations with parent stakeholders? And I guess I would add to that, beyond getting parents' feedback on this particular proposal, also thoughts on how to ensure parents are getting adequate information about their child's progress based on these assessments.
So I'm debating between a short and a long answer.
It's 10:13.
That's where I was. I would say that I've got draft plans, but I need to solidify those plans. And I think one of the interesting plans was an educator approach and said, for those educators that walk both the educator and the parent in the district, you get a kind of a unique perspective. So how could a group of individuals that fill that role, both from lunch aides to TAs to teachers, is it worth it to pull a group together that walk both those places and say, how can we improve the quality of information that goes out and the understanding of it and what happens with it? I also think that we've got some really strong community organizations. The other group I mentioned in there are our dual language educators, but also our dual language community. So can we work through ABC or AFH to engage those populations to figure out the best way to be sharing information out? And my hope is to work with my colleague, Dr. Caligati over there, and Joaquin Stevenson as well, because that does land in that family engagement and the role in which districts and schools work together to share information that's accessible and understandable to families. So I would love to come back on that with a tighter plan. It's definitely in consideration, just not locked in yet.
There's one more thing. In the memo, it's so nicely written, but it's slightly in a technical way on purposes of assessment and criteria and why we do what we do and what we hope to get out of it. And I think if we can do some work over the summer into the fall, we can work with Melissa Messenger in our communications department to sort of craft what's really in the memo and is really rich in a way that can be engaging in the community on the purposes of assessment and why, when your kid is taking assessment A, B, or C, this is the reason why, and this is where we're going with it. And I think we've got a really nice starting block with this.
And so I'll just add that while we know that assessment tools historically have a biased purpose, there are some of us in the world who have constantly been told by these tools that we're inferior, right? Whether it's us as individuals or us as a group. So the performance on these do matter to us. Like, we want to know how our kids are doing, right? We know that our kids are brilliant, and we want to see them having the opportunity to demonstrate it, some of us. So I guess I want to highlight that recognition of the fact that these tools have historically been used to perpetuate untruths about individuals and groups of individuals does not mean that we don't want to be communicated with about how children are doing according to these tools. And it's always concerning to me when I talk to folks in our community who are not clear on what tools are being used, how their children are doing on it, what they, where their child is, what they can do to be of support. I think, folks want this information. And I think, we can communicate the purpose of assessment, but I'm thinking practically, how are people given the information that they need about the person in their home that they want to support?
In a way that's understandable and accessible.
Yes, and actionable. And the other point that I've made this point before, and I feel like it's being considered in some ways, but for the SEL assessment, it's really exciting that we found something to pilot. It's disappointing that it wasn't necessarily a great pilot, but I also want to point out that it's important for an SEL tool to be culturally relevant and for us to have a lens on that. Because what's considered aggressive in communication and through one cultural lens may be very different from another. And, it would be a shame if the tool was providing biased information and not recognizing the strengths that children bring because it doesn't have a cultural lens for their strengths.
I think that's so key, and Stacy's and team's game plan on how to really assess what we want to use and what the purposes are so that we can actually move forward is going to be really important, especially so we don't end up labeling kids, using the component parts of SEL and then over-labeling kids. I think we've got a lot of work to do, and the jury's really out on a lot of the tools out there to the extent to which they are either biased or to the extent to which they are culturally biased. And I think we've got to do the deep dive to be comfortable about that.
Yeah, and
we'll
that-
also, we'll also learn something from kids, because there's a social emotional component of kids. So that's, at least will keep us on our toes as we move forward.
That, and I think, again, how can we find, again, ensuring that these assessments are measuring, measuring where kids are at, but also ensuring that we can provide the proper supports and then evaluating that, right? And also cataloging it and making sure that when an assessment tells us that a child needs some supports here or they're doing incredibly here, that the proper supports are provided. And I think for a lot of school districts, and I think this is a result of No Child Left Behind, is that, again, we've always left it at, well, they're not doing really good in reading, they're not going to do good in math, and we pull, we pull money and resources away. And it's different now. And so we have this flexibility to measure children in a more comprehensive way. MAP doesn't measure all the incredible programs that Martin King, the art programs over at King Arts. It doesn't measure, some of the project-based learning that's going on. I mean, there's pieces that are missing there, or the ABC program. Those cultural pieces, again, how do you measure that? But we know that those pieces are actually making, show that our children are brilliant, but we just haven't found a way to capture it. So again, just as we move forward with this, what can we do to make sure that our assessments are capturing, again, the whole child and their cultural experiences and what they bring and what their families bring to our educational settings.
So I wonder if any of the metrics or the rubric associated with the SEL assessment was looked at by a sample of people with a culturally relevant lens. Like if it was looked at by our ACC teachers and our TWE educators, our ACC parents and TWE parents to...
Are you asking specifically about the Cell Web assessment? That we
to take a look at what are the measurements and are they representative of maybe a contingent of people with a different cultural lens. And
I know in this case that was not the case, but that's who we include in the process moving forward and where we gather our feedback from, we can definitely consider as we frame a new process.
All right, well, thank you very much for the information and the work going forward. With no further business, I adjourn this meeting at 10:21 p.m. Thank you.